My name is Julie Mayfield. I am co-director at Mountain True, and we are here tonight at a public meeting hosted by the public staff of the Utilities Commission to talk about Duke Energy's proposed modernization plan that would build a 650 megawatt natural gas plant in Asheville and about 40 miles of 230 kilovolt transmission lines through Henderson and Polk counties into South Carolina, and then also a new substation in South Carolina. You can hear behind me or maybe see that there are hundreds of people here. This is the second meeting similar to this in the last week, and at the one in South Carolina there were over 1,000 people. So there are a lot of people concerned about this, concerned about the impacts on the land, the environment, view sheds, farmland, tourism, the economy, a whole host of concerns. Duke Energy's rationale for building the new power lines and the new plant are that we are seeing an increase in demand in our energy use and a projected increase in our population in order to justify that additional capacity. We don't necessarily agree with that. And most importantly, we know that Duke has not done any analysis about the ability of renewable energy or energy efficiency to impact their plans. So where they should have started with this was with an idea of creating the smallest footprint and the smallest plant and the smallest upgrades to transmission lines as possible, maximizing the use of energy efficiency and renewable energy, and only growing up as they needed to. Instead, where they started was the biggest thing they could build, and now we're in a position of trying to force them to back down.
Well, I'm Tom Williams at Duke Energy and Corporate Communications. The hearing is the final hearing of our public comment period. We had extended that period for several weeks given the enthusiasm around this project. And this hearing actually stopped on Monday, and we're continuing the public comment period through this hearing tonight, so we can continue to get those comments. And there are 80 people signed up, a lot of enthusiasm. We certainly regret that so many folks have gotten upset about this, because we're going to be narrowing down the list very soon, in about a month. And I think that will be a key thing. We have to start off with a big number of segments to look at, and then we narrow it down after we get public input, and that's what we're getting. And we think it's a great thing, all this public input.
So what is it that Duke is planning to do?
Okay. Well, this is the transmission project that is part of the modernization of the power plant on the Asheville site. There's a coal plant there today that's going to be replaced with a gas plant. There's a series of transmission upgrades that are going to happen as well. This is the most significant part of those transmission upgrades. There are several different substations added in the Asheville area, and this is the most significant part of that. It's about a $250 million project on a standalone basis, roughly. It'll be about a 45-mile line, depending on how the segments go. It's a 230,000 kilovolt line, the second largest line that we have. It will be plugging into our 500 system, the largest power line that we have, that will ultimately be able to move power up and down the East Coast, so it improves the reliability. It's the first time this area will ever have access to power from the 500 system, and we think that's a great thing. This has been in the planning stages for some time. It's been in reports since the just 2005, 2006 time frame. That's something that was needed, and so we're going to be we're getting input, and that's what we're here tonight. And
we're going to ask everybody to be seated. We're going to get started. What we'll do is the fire marshal staff, as people are still coming in, will usher in pairs or whatever is managed to find as many people seated as possible. However, at some point in time, we may be full, and we're just not able to give them this. Very good. So everybody's got their cell phones on silent, and we're ready to begin. I'm Steve White, I'm the county manager here, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and help facilitate and host this meeting on behalf of the Henderson County Board of Commissioners. Chairman of the Board of Commissioners is Honorable Tommy Thompson. Chairman Thompson would like to address the crowd.
Thank you, Steve. I'm only going to take a minute or so we can get business. On behalf of the Henderson County Commissioners, we welcome everyone here tonight. We especially thank Duke Energy and the public staff and Utilities Commission for coming this evening. They were invited and chose to come to listen to you, to have answers given to you. In just a few moments, I want you to understand that this is the public staff of the Utilities Commission. This is not the Utilities Commissioners. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Chris Ayers in just a few moments, who is the Executive Director with the Public Staff and Utilities Commission. And the last thing I want to say is we've got a big crowd. I know that emotions are high in regards to these matters that are before us, and I would request that you conduct yourselves as we always have in Henderson County in a very nice manner, and give these folks who do not have to be here. They do not have to be here. They came, they were invited, they were not forced. Give them a good Henderson County welcome. You didn't come here tonight to hear me. Therefore, Mr. Chris Ayers, you're invited to the podium as the Executive Director of the Public Staff and Utilities Commission. Mr. Ayers.
Thank you. Good evening. As Chairman Thompson said, I am Chris Ayers. I am Executive Director of the North Carolina Utilities Commission Public Staff. I'm born and raised in the mountain of Rutherford County, so it's always good to be back here in Western North Carolina. I want to thank you for coming tonight. This is an important issue. Folks have a lot of questions, and part of our role tonight is to answer some of those questions and give you a chance to express concerns of your own. I want to thank Henderson County for the invitation to come out tonight. I want to thank Blue Ridge Community College for hosting this event, providing the facility. The public staff represents the North Carolina using and consuming public in matters before the Utilities Commission. We are a state agency comprised of 74 engineers, lawyers, accountants, economists, and analysts, and we present the case of the using and consuming public in front of the Utilities Commission and Utilities Commission documents. Even though we share the same first four words in our name, the public staff is a separate and independent agency from the Utilities Commission. I am not a commission. I am not a judge. Neither I nor the public staff are either decision makers in this matter, but the public staff is a party to Utility Commission dockets, just like the utility company, customer groups, and other stakeholder groups. I would like to introduce my staff. James McLaughlin is the head of the Electric Engineering Division. J.D. Lucas is an engineer with the Electric Division, and Diana Downey is an attorney for the Legal Division of the public staff. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to facilitate a discussion about the proposed Foothills Transmission Project and hopefully answer a lot of questions that we all have regarding the project. This is an information session. It is not a hearing. And the information we hear tonight is not evidence that will be used by the Utilities Commission or binding the Commission in any decision that it was rendered. When and if Duke Energy files an application for construction of a transmission line, the Utilities Commission will open formal proceedings, which will include public hearings and an evidentiary hearing. The information we hear tonight is intended to help all of us understand the need for the project, the scope of the project, the impact of the project, and the process that Duke is going through using to evaluate proposed routes for the proposed transmission line prior to filing its application. Tonight's meeting has two parts. The first part is going to involve public staff asking Duke Energy representatives to respond to a variety of questions regarding the proposed transmission line. The public staff has compiled a list of questions regarding various aspects of the proposed project. Many of these questions came from you, the general public, through emails, letters, and phone calls prior to this meeting. We have received a lot of questions from the public, and we've made our best effort to incorporate as many of them as we can into our Q&A session. We have also received questions that you have filled out tonight. My staff is going through them to try and pull the ones that are not already in our questions, and we will try and incorporate as many of those as possible. Duke Energy has brought a number of company representatives this evening to provide answers to these questions. I want to thank them for agreeing to participate in this meeting, and we'll give them a chance to introduce themselves before they get started. While you may not get all of the questions answered tonight, the public staff's goal is that we all have a better understanding of the project and the process when we leave here tonight. That's the first part of the meeting. After the Q&A session with Duke, which will sort of be almost an interview format, we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we will move to the second part of the hearing, which is designed to hear from you, the public. Individuals that have signed up will have the opportunity to speak for the purpose of raising issues they believe should be considered as part of the process of selecting the proposed group. While speakers will not be giving testimony, it is an opportunity for Duke and the public staff to hear your concerns directly regarding the proposed transmission line. In order to allow as many people as possible to participate, speakers will be limited to 3 minutes and limited to those with North Carolina residential addresses. We have a very long list tonight. It is quite possible we will not get all the way through the list before we have to leave this evening. So I ask for your patience and understanding in that. We do have a few individuals that I want to recognize for being here tonight. They're down here on the front row, and if you can stand when I call your name, that'd be great. We have several legislators in attendance tonight. Representative Chuck Brady is here. Representative Chris Whitmire is here. Senator Apodaca is not here yet. I don't know if he's going to be able to make it, but Julie Bradford is a staffer from his office. She is here. I want to take just a moment to thank you for coming here tonight. I know that budget negotiations are still ongoing back in Raleigh, and it's very difficult for y'all to pull yourselves away from that. And so it means a lot to us, the public staff, and it means a lot to the folks in this room that y'all are here tonight. I can tell you that your legislators have been actively following this project. They're in contact with the public staff, seeking information, looking for answers to questions that you pose to them. We will continue working with them as they provide information and present your questions and concerns on your behalf. Again, I want to thank y'all for being here. I also want to recognize the Henderson County Commissioners. We have Chairman Tommy Thompson, who spoke earlier. We have Greg Hawkins, Bill Baxley, Charlie Messer, and Mike Eddy. Thank you all for coming this evening as well, and thank you for hosting us. So, before we begin, I want to answer a couple of questions that we have received of the public staff with respect to who the public staff represents and what our charge is. As I said earlier, the public staff represents the using and consuming public in matters before the Utilities Commission involving utility, rates, and service. The public staff represents all North Carolina ratepayers who are affected by Duke's proposed Western Carolina's modernization project, the proposed transmission line, as well as the proposed gas-fired combination cycle generating line. Our representation, however, is limited to matters within the Utilities Commission's jurisdiction. In the case of the generating plant, that means the determination of whether the public convenience and necessity requires that the plant be built, whether it is the least cost option for meeting the long-term energy needs of DEP's and Duke Energy Products' customers. In the case of the transmission line, it means the determination of whether the line is necessary to meet the reasonable needs of the public for an adequate and reliable supply of energy, whether the construction of the line in the proposed location is reasonable, preferred, and in the public interest compared to reasonable alternatives. It includes whether the costs associated with the line are reasonable, whether the impact the line will have on the environment is justified considering the state of available technologies and the nature and economics of various alternatives, and whether the environmental compatibility, public convenience, and necessity require the transmission line. The burden of proof will be on Duke Energy to present evidence supporting each of these determinations. The General Commission with the duty of making each of these determinations, and then discharge the public staff on behalf of the public with reviewing the application, participating in the evidentiary, making recommendations to the Commission. The statutory framework for siting transmission lines like this one is designed to protect the interests of all citizens by ensuring that decisions regarding whether to build a line, what type of line to build, and where to build it, are made in a systematic, transparent, and environmentally conscious manner, taking into account the best information and available technology. Impacts on individual citizens are clearly part of the equation and ones that the public staff takes quite seriously. We believe we look out for the interests of citizens who are impacted by the project more effectively by ensuring the statutory requirements are met before a line is sited and constructed. I hope that answers the number of questions that you had with respect to who the public staff is and our role in this process. At this point, I want to move into the Q&A session with Duke representatives. I would like to ask Duke Energy to come forward, introduce your individuals, and then we'll start the meeting.
Good evening, everybody. It is our pleasure to be here with you, and hopefully we can answer all of the questions that you have related to this very important project. My name is Robert Sykes. I am the general manager of Duke Energy's Western Zone. And the best way for me to describe that for you is if it's in the mountains of North Carolina and Duke Energy serves it, then it's in my area of responsibility to oversee operations there. In addition to that role, I have overall oversight responsibility for what we're calling our Western Modernization project. This is a very complicated project from a Duke Energy standpoint. So it's very important for us to make sure that all parts of our company are aligned and coordinated, and that's my role. So I've been in this job for about 4 weeks now. And I wouldn't even tell you that I'm a mile wide, much less an inch deep. But don't worry, because I have got some really good help with me tonight. We've brought along quite a few subject matter experts, and I think we have the right people here to answer your questions. So with that, I'm going to ask my panel here to introduce themselves real briefly. So, Steve.
Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Wilson. I'm the program manager for the transmission pieces of the Western Carolinas Modernization project, and I look forward to your questions.
Good evening. My name is Glenn Snyder. I manage our resource planning group for the Carolinas, so we determine the long-term needs and best ways to meet the needs of the Carolinas utilities.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gail Simpson, and I'm in the transmission organization. I'm an initiatives manager, and I'm also managing some of the public engagement activities.
Good evening. I'm Randy Beltry. I'm in transmission engineering, manager of siting and permitting.
So we also have several other subject matter experts with us tonight. We won't introduce them, but you may see us call upon them if there's a question that comes up that they can be helpful with. So thank you all very much for allowing us to be here.
And I want to thank you for coming and agreeing to engage in this conversation. Let's get started, and I'm going to conduct this sort of in an interview style. I think that might help get to the answers that people have questions about. And I'll put the question to you, and whoever you feel appropriate to answer the question, just dive in, and a couple of you have thoughts, that's fine too. I want to start off with talking about the need for the project. We've heard a lot of questions about, does Duke Energy need a transmission line? Does it need one at this level to serve the region? But before you talk about the need, I wonder if you could talk about what Duke considers to be the region, because we hear a lot about the need in the region.
Could you clarify if the region is Western North Carolina, is it Asheville, is it the eastern part of the United States? Can y'all talk about what you mean by the region?
Yeah, when we talk about need, it's interpreted differently by a lot of different people, and we saw that in questions as well. So maybe we start with just a little bit of an overview of how power is served in the Carolinas, both North and South Carolina. In general, there are 4 publicly owned utilities in the Carolinas. Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolina are 2 of the larger ones in North Carolina, but we also serve customers in South Carolina. In addition, in South Carolina, you have South Carolina Electric and Gas, and in a small corner of North Carolina, there's Dominion Power. So we have what's called regulated footprints. So we are charged with, as a vertically integrated utility, an obligation to reliably serve our customers at the lowest reasonable price as a charter for us doing business in the Carolinas. And so when we talk about need, we talk about it at the utility level. So you've heard the term, spoke earlier, DEP, that's Duke Energy Progress, and DEC, which is Duke Energy Carolinas. Those are 2 separate utilities. Duke Energy Progress serves 2 service territories. This is what makes it a little bit confusing, is that Duke Energy Progress has an eastern balancing authority or service area that's in the Raleigh area on the East Coast, as well as a Western Carolina service territory, which is over here in the mountains. Duke Energy Carolinas has a service territory right in between Duke Energy Progress East and Duke Energy Progress West. So this project that we're talking about, the transmission line and the associated power plant, serves both Duke Energy Progress West as well as the broader interconnected system. So we'll talk about the dual role it serves, but we have to ensure that there's adequate supply in each of those service territories as well as for the system as a whole.
Can you talk about the timeline in terms of when Duke determined that a new transmission line was needed for this area?
So Steve and I can share this one from a resource planning perspective. We alluded to the need for the new transmission line in our 2014 IRP as a potential project that we were looking at to help deal with growing needs in our western service territory. And so we've been looking at this, examining it, for a number of months prior to that. But the broader need, basically, that recognizes that the western service territory, DEP West, is pretty isolated from the rest of the grid, has been an issue that the transmission community has looked at longer than that. Steve, I don't want to add to that.
Well, we actually were looking at it earlier in the 2008 timeframe, for example. We had in our planning collaborative, which is a group of people from various different utilities around the state who get together and look at joint planning between utilities. And we've actually had consideration of this as early as 2008 as an alternative to try to bring transmission. We've had a weak transmission tied to the Western Carolinas region for some time, and we really started looking at it more seriously late the second half of last year when we decided that the load was growing. We had a couple of tough winters over the last 2 years with the polar vortex events that we've seen, and so it kind of heightened our awareness that we really needed to do something. We needed to be able to serve the growing customer load in the region, and we needed to be able to do it reliably. Currently, we're very dependent on the coal units for that reliability, and we have to kind of gold plate them, make sure that they're running reliably, and they're getting aged and older. So, and our import capability right now is very limited. So all that kind of came together, and we developed this plan. First of all, to bring transmission into the region. This was before we had decided on a gas solution, gas plant solution up here. First, in the middle of last year, I was asked to put together a team and develop all the information needed to carry forward internally within the corporation for a new transmission line from the 500 kV current existing 500 kilovolt transmission line between the Cliffside and Jocassee terminal points. We have a 500 kV line that crosses pretty much through the edge of Campbell, and that's the line we're talking about. We're tying into that line with a new 500 to 230 kV substation. We acquired that property early this year, and we're siting a new 40 to 45 mile long transmission line from that point up to the actual plant to provide the transmission grid connection we need, the strong tie to the broader transmission grid. So we started working on it middle of last year. All that came together in February of this year. We actually went for transmission line approval. We actually held back on it due to the local gas company approaching us at that time to see if we were interested in joining with them on a joint venture on expanding the gas line, which was a win-win. I think Lynn can talk more about this. I don't get into the details of that, but it was a win-win for us. So we took a look at that in the March, April timeframe of this year. It looked like it was definitely the right thing to do. It was economically justified. Helps us tremendously. The reliability helps the environment. So we made that commitment internally and announced both projects publicly in the May timeframe.
Thank you for that answer. You mentioned a couple of concepts. One was load growth. Can you talk a little about what load growth has looked like in the region over the last 5-10 years and what you expect it to do over the next 5 to 10 years? Because we've heard a lot of questions about, what is load growth? Is it accelerating? Is it flat? Can you talk to that?
Certainly. One of the things that when we talk about in load growth from a planning perspective, there's two general concepts out there. One is what's called our peak demand. So that is, what is our maximum demand at sort of a moment in time? You can think about, really cold winter mornings or really hot summer afternoons driving that peak demand, and that peak demand year over year growing. That's a little bit different concept than how much total energy is being consumed. And so there's two terms that often get confused. I've seen it in the questions, I've seen it in several stakeholders using them intermittently, but what we're talking about in planning is that we have to have enough generation and transmission capability to meet the peak demands when the stress on the system is the greatest. And so what we've seen historically at DEP has been about 2% load growth. We project that slowing down, demand growth, to just under about 1.5% is what we've been projecting in the IRP. It's slowed down since the downturn in 2008. We don't see it fully recovering at DEP, so we're at about 1.5%, just under, as a system. What I will say is that that's for both. We talked earlier about the eastern part of our system and the west at Duke Energy Progress. Duke Energy Progress has seen that the west has actually outstripped that 1.5%. It's one of our faster growing areas. I think the reason a lot of folks are here tonight is it's a pretty attractive place to live. We've got the mountains, we've got tourism, a lot of but we recognize that. We really do. And it doesn't seem like it. But at the end of the day, you have to meet that demand. It's not an attractive place to live if you don't have reliable electricity. And really so what we're seeing is over 2% load growth historically in the west. So the west the western part of the state is growing faster than the eastern part of the state, and it also has a very limited number of resources that are aged resources. So the coal plants Steve spoke about are over 50 years old, will be over 50 at the time of retirement, pushing 60 years old on one of the units. The gas-fired peakers will be 20 years old at that time. And really that's the limited amount of resources that exist in this constrained part of the state to serve other than limited import from the eastern part of the state. And so it's a combination of that load growth that we're experiencing in this part of the state, along with the obsolescence of some of the central generation in this part of the state that drive a need for incremental infrastructure in order to be able to reliably serve the western part of the state for years to come.
Thank you for that. So Duke's proposing to build the transmission line because it believes there's insufficient transmission in the region. Can you talk some about the transmission resources that you have now and what comes and goes and what the proposed project is designed to alleviate in terms of insufficient resources?
Yeah, I'll start with that if Steve wants to have it pass it to him. So today, if you think about it again, when we draw it up, I think about it in sort of three bubbles. There's a big bubble in the middle that's Duke Energy Carolinas, and then you have Duke Energy Progress East on the eastern part of the state, and Duke Energy Progress West. And so for Duke Energy Progress, it has to bring power through DEC and into DEP West. And that link from DEC, the big bubble in the middle, to DEP West, this part of the state, is pretty limited. Right now we have usable transmission, and I know megawatts may not mean a lot, but I'll try and put it in perspective, of let's say approximately 600, I'll round 600 megawatts of usable import. And we saw a peak load when we hit these winter peaks, and it was near zero or below zero in this part of the state, of 1,200 megawatts. So we only have enough import capability to usable import to meet about half of that peak. This new transmission line will double the total importable capacity, total imports into the region, to about 1,200 megawatts of total import capability. Now, that doesn't mean that we can use that full 1,200. A lot of people, and in some of the questions I've been reading, when I've been to other public forums, have tried to add, well, you've got 800 megawatts today, you're going to retire a coal plant, you're going to build this new gas plant, you're going to have almost 1,200 megawatts of generation. Why do you need 1,200 megawatts of import capability? And the way the electric system works is these are mechanical devices. These power plants don't run 100% of the time. And so you have to have redundancy built in so that if a plant goes offline or needs maintenance during a cold winter event, you still need to serve that critical function of serving that peak. And so some of that transmission can be used in two ways. When the power plant is running, it needs to be sitting there available so that if the plant trips offline, you seamlessly see power come in from another part of the region. You don't lose electric supply on a 0-degree day. If that plant's not running and it is offline, then you can use that transmission to bring power in. So you can't add the two together because one backs up the other. And so you need redundancy in your power supply in the western part of the state. And what the power plant does in combination with the transmission line is it provides that reliable service using new state-of-the-art technologies and allowing for load growth for some years to come.
We've heard and we've also read that Duke has cited some regulatory requirements as one of the reasons for the transmission line in terms of reliability and so forth. Can you help us understand what some of those regulatory requirements are, where they come from?
As I mentioned earlier, as a regulated utility, publicly owned regulated utility, we are subject to a number of state and federal guidelines that we must adhere to. And the provision of reliable service is core to that. And so each year, when we submit our integrated resource plan, we don't only show our plans for future generation going into the future to just meet that demand, but we show that we carry enough electric supply, not only today, but what we're planning to do out into the future, to meet projected demand plus a reserve margin. And that reserve margin, which currently is approximately 15%, we just filed a new IRP that we're suggesting may need to go to 17%. But that extra percentage is to allow for just the types of things I spoke about earlier. What if we have colder than expected weather and more load to serve? What if we forecast just a little bit too little and demand comes in more? We still need to be able to serve that load. We also give some allowance for the fact that when you have multiple generators around the state, both North and South Carolina, that 100% of those generators will not be online at time of peak. Some of them, a small percentage, will be down for maintenance. So you have to have enough generation and transmission in total to meet your peak load plus a reserve margin so that you can reliably meet load today and into the future. And that's an obligation we have just on the generation side. And there's a host of and I'll let perhaps Steve elaborate, there's a host of transmission standards that are regulated both at the state and the federal level that say the same thing. You've got to have adequate transmission capabilities to be able to move that generation to the load when it's needed with the appropriate amount of redundancy built in. And so this universal reliable service is a foundational tenet of both state and federal regulation at both the transmission and the generation level.
At the transmission line level, we have to plan for contingencies, as Glenn mentioned. We have to look at another line out, for example, that would create most current electricity flowing on through the line we're studying. In this case, we've got one double circuit 230 kV line coming from the kind of the Greenville area to the Pisgah type DEC's Duke Energy Carolinas Pisgah type station, then on up into the Asheville plant. Obviously, if that line goes out today, then the lower voltage, 144 kV kilovolt transmission lines have to absorb all that power flow. And so we're really restricted today. And we have to look at, for example, when we install this new line, we have to look at that circuit being out, making sure this new line can handle all the flow coming through. So there's quite a bit of contingency analysis so that we can make sure that our transmission grid is there for you when you need it on those very cold mornings. So that's what it's all about.
Thank you. I'd like to move now to a few questions about understanding how the proposed transmission project interrelates to the proposed gas plant that Duke has proposed. Can we've heard a lot of information in terms of the proposed gas plant is going to be larger than the one that currently exists. And there's questions in terms of what's going to happen to that excess power. Is that going to go out of the state? Is that going to go serve the West? Can you talk a little about how the gas plant, the proposed gas plant, compares to the coal plant, and then how that energy would be used within the region, within the system?
Yeah, again, if from a supply and demand balance, you have to look at the system as a whole as well as the individual isolated pockets. So we're solving for two variables here. What's Duke Energy Progress need for its entire east and west system? But then how do we make sure that we have reliable service in a constrained area like the west? So we're looking at both of those when we do our planning. And in the west right now, The coal plants, again, you know, 2 different units. One was built in 1964, one in 1971. So you fast forward to 2019, 2020 when these are retired, and you've got over 50 and approaching 60-year-old coal units. They total just under 400 megawatts. For many years, we've been saying we need, even when we thought we were going to run those coal plants a little longer, you know, we originally thought maybe we would run those 1 more decade. We could push them out perhaps through the 20s. That was going to be insufficient. We were going to need incremental generation or transmission or both, and we were starting to signal that in our resource plans. And so we've had for a number of years, in addition to those coal plants, the need for new fuel oil-fired turbines in the western part of the state that total 3 turbines totaling about 126 megawatts. So if I add the, let's say roughly the 400 megawatt of coal plants, it's 376, but I'm going to try to use round numbers. 400 megawatts of coal and about 125 megawatts of those oil-fired peakers. And if I take those out of my plan, which is what we're doing with this project, I've taken out over 500 megawatts of generation from my previous plans, and I've replaced it with a natural gas, very efficient natural gas combined cycle unit with a much lower environmental footprint. And that plant is going to be about, in the summer, rated around 650 megawatts. So relative to past plans, I've added about a net 150 megawatts with this larger scale project that allows for a certain amount of load growth, so we're not back every couple of years looking for more generation in the region. And what the transmission does and how it relates to that is you couldn't even begin to look at that type. The transmission was needed, as Steve mentioned, whether we built this plant or not, in order to better interconnect this isolated region to the broader grid. Duke Energy Progress East has over 12,000 megawatts of generation. Duke Energy Carolinas, in the big bubble in the middle, has 22,000 megawatts of generation, compared to under 1,000 megawatts in the west. The only thing we have here in the west right now today is that the older coal plants and some less efficient simple cycle gas plants that are not near as efficient as the one being proposed that are going to be 20 years old. And so if you look in the east, and what we'd like to be able to interconnect better to is there's a fleet of nuclear generation. There's additional, more efficient, newer, state-of-the-art controlled coal generation. There's new efficient gas in the east. And most of the renewables that are being added to our grid. North Carolina is one of the fastest growing installations of commercial scale solar due to state and federal policy that promotes that, is being developed in the east. So we are calling for about 1,000 megawatts by 2020 of commercial scale solar. Probably one of the leading utilities in terms of the amount of solar that we plan to add. That solar is all in the east, so the ability to interconnect to a grid of diverse generators with diverse fuel sources is dependent upon having the interconnection capability to access those. And so this is where the two tie together from a reliability perspective. It provides for a more reliable grid. From a cost perspective, it allows us to operate that diverse fleet of generators in the most economic fashion possible. So today, because of our limited import capability, whether the coal units are economic or not, there are times when we just simply can't import generation from cheaper, more efficient, cleaner sources in the east because our import capabilities are too weak. So we run the coal plants, and as Steve says, we're very reliant on them, so we put a lot of money to make sure they're very reliable, and so that we can run those irrespective of their efficiency. So the transmission lines allow us to retire the plant, better interconnect to the eastern part of the grid, and operate our fleet in an economic fashion.
So just to make sure I understood your part of your answer there was, so the new transmission line is not required solely because of you're proposing to build a gas facility. that the transmission line would be needed regardless of whether you were building that gas facility or not. I understand that correctly?
Yes, we were looking at the transmission line. The way I think about this, Mr. Ayers, is that the transmission line allowed the possibility to retire the coal plant, that it's a necessary ingredient to being able to build this gas plant, but the gas plant doesn't cause the need for the transmission line. So the transmission line would have a better interconnected, even if we chose to continue to operate the older coal plants and build fuel oil peakers, the transmission line would have provided for enhanced reliability and the ability to economically dispatch our fleet, even without the new gas plant.
What is the megawatt capacity of the proposed transmission line?
Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it adds an incremental 600, 800, sorry.
So we've heard a lot about import. The transmission line is two ways. Can you talk about, are there any circumstances in which power will be flowing out? Where would that be going, and under what circumstances?
You know, we were talking about this when I was reading some of the questions, and I realized that different people mean exporting two different ways. I want to be careful not to mix those two up. So exporting to other parts of the utility system, the North Carolinian, South Carolinian customers that are part of our utility, that type of export will happen in low load periods. So let's say you have a nice cool day in the summer in the mountains, but it's some heat's coming in off the coast and it's really hot, and you're at low load to the west. Could that plant be exporting to the east to serve customers? Certainly. I mean, that's the way we plan the grid. Today, even across our limited transmission, we bring nuclear generation across what transmission we do have available from east to west. Right now, almost all is import. The ability to both import and export is one of the benefits of the project. So yes, there are conditions where that transmission will be used to bring power into the west, and under certain load conditions, there are times when that plant will provide helpful support for the east. So you're getting the benefits on both parts of your grid. Now, another way that term had been used that I've seen questions is that somehow we were going to build this so that we could make sales up into other states or sell this, into what's called PJM, one of the organized RTOs and the transmission organizations that are up north. That is absolutely not the case. That has never been analyzed or presented as a benefit of this project. We don't plan for it based on that. As a whole, the company, I think, historically has been selling far less than 1% of its total generation out of state, and that's usually to a neighbor utility when they're in need of cheaper generation. So we have cheaper generation, they compensate us for that cheaper generation, but that is a very, very tiny percent of the time. And this plant was not designed or none of the benefits that were ascribed to this plant had anything to do with selling outside of the Carolinas. So in that sense of the word, no, this plant will not be built so that we can export power out of state. It will benefit all of the system within the state, though.
One of the questions that we've received from a number of folks is which utility customers will bear the cost of constructing the gas plant and the transmission? Can you speak to the entity?
So by and large, these costs are going to be borne by Duke Energy Progress. Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas are two separate legal entities, two separate utilities, two separate sets of rates that exist within those utilities. Once the companies merged back in 2012, that didn't change the fact that they're still operating separate utilities. One of the benefits the merger did bring for customers, though, is that we can, when we have excess generation, we give first priority to our sister utility through what's called a joint dispatch agreement. So that ensures that the most efficient generation between the two separate legal entities is serving the load, and that one of the other sister utilities is not serving load with more expensive generation when cheaper generation was available at its neighboring sister utility. And through that joint dispatch agreement, all customers in the Carolina will benefit as the system gets modernized and you put in more efficient natural gas plants and replace less efficient, more expensive coal generation. That's a lower cost of production, and so that lower cost of production is shared amongst the customers in the Carolinas. Oh, so I'm sorry. Maybe there's some confusion as to the cost side. Costs are with DEP. The cost will stay with Duke Energy Progress. The cost of the plant. Both. See, that's a good point. Thank you for knowing that. There is no DEP West and DEP East when it comes to the costs, and it's really fortunate for people in the West because serving generation remotely is expensive. But we don't charge rates on regional basis. So there's not an east rate, a west rate, this county rate, or that county rate. The way rates are calculated and charged in a regulated utility is the total costs of operating that utility are shared amongst all the customers, and it doesn't matter if they live in Wilmington or in Asheville or in Henderson. So those costs are shared on an average basis. And so you don't say, geez, this really, local area is cheap to serve because they're urban, and rural areas or isolated areas, you have to build more transmission, you have to build more facilities, so we're going to charge them more. That's not how rates work in a regulated electric utility. So the benefits of this project are shared amongst all the customers, as are the costs on an equal basis. So it isn't as though we charge county by county or city by city rates for projects or for our service.
But when you say shared, they're shared with Duke Energy Progress.
Duke Energy Progress, yes.
All right. We could talk about load and need for several hours, but I want to move on to talking about the process that Duke has used and is going to use for choosing a transmission path. I wondered if you could just talk generally about how Duke went about identifying the proposed paths that it has made available to the public for review and comment. If you could just add a very general way, talk about how you got to the maps and where you landed and where you didn't.
Absolutely, and that's a very good question, Mr. Ayers. The process that we use to determine these alternate routes that everyone is very much aware of is a similar process that we use for all the Carolinas and siting transmission facilities. For North Carolina, South Carolina, East, West, the whole Carolinas area. We use similar processes in other jurisdictions too, but the first phase of that process is determining those alternate routes. So we take a very broad picture of a study area. As Steve mentioned, from the Campobello Dye Station site to the actual plant, we take a broad look at the study area. When we have that study area defined broadly initially, what we do is start to collect data from various agencies, from federal, state, local, county agencies, and some of that data that we collect would be like occupied buildings, cultural resources, natural resources, land use, federal, state conservation easements, schools, churches, cemeteries, existing infrastructure, existing transmission lines, roads. So we collect all that data of this large study area, approximately 600 square miles of a study area. So it's very broad. And we have this data and we form some weighting or constraints. For an example, would be like occupied homes. We would have a constraint weight for that to start to try to hone in on some of these alternate routes. So one of the data is occupied buildings. We look at all the homes in the area and try to get past that would avoid as many of those homes as we can. Obviously, the area is very congested. And there's a lot of constraints. But that's just one piece of the data on that for the study area. The other piece, like I said, is cultural resources and natural resources and the land use. So we have a kind of high-level picture of all these constraints. And at that point, what we typically do is start to define the study area even a little bit more smaller, we would say. In this case, as everyone knows, everyone in this room and everyone that has looked at this project, there are a lot of constraints. So we kept the study area as broad as we can, what we had originally, instead of narrowing the study area down. And we start to look at any and all viable routes from point A to point B in the study area. In addition to that, what we have done is get input from a host of state, local, and regulatory agencies in this study area in order to place these routes on the maps for the entire study area. We met with agencies during that process and got a lot of feedback from them. So that's how we kind of got to this point in the part of phase one on where all these alternate routes are located at this point. Now, the second phase, these are preliminary alternate routes that we're looking at, and there's quite a few of them, as everyone knows after viewing all these maps and internet sites and so forth. So the next step in phase two was to gain input from the public. Public meetings we had, the comments we received. That input for 600 square miles of a study area, we cannot gather all the data at that high level. We need to outreach with the public to get comments. We had a public outreach meeting. We also had quite a few comments. You folks are in the local area. You know the specifics, and those comments are critical in us to do an evaluation to go ahead and proceed to determine some of the ranking of these alternate routes. So that's where we're at currently. I will say that during the comment period and during an input period, we have done a lot of ground truthing, field observations from public roads where we can have access. We haven't done it just by mapping and looking on a computer. We have done a lot of field work, and we really truly appreciate all the comments that we have received to help us to make a decision on the preferred route.
There is none.
I appreciate your enthusiasm. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we want to get through as many questions as we can, so please. So, can you talk, does Duke take property values and land use into account in looking at these proposed routes?
We do not take property values into account, but what we do take into account, what we do take into account is the visibility of each route and the land use that we cross, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial property. So we do take into consideration land use, proximity to occupied homes, etc. But we do not specifically take into as a factor property values.
Has Duke undertaken an environmental impact study related to any or all of the proposed routes?
EIS with
Can you explain what an EIS is?
environmental impact statement. Once a preferred route is selected, we will go through and go on the ground to collect data, environmental impacts, and how to mitigate those impacts. At this level, we do not have the ability to go out there and actually physically survey to get the data of what is out there. We can get the data from Natural Resources Commission, Wildlife Commission, county data, but we can't actually physically go on the ground to collect the data. But we will do that once we have further confidence.
Is Duke undertaking this work on its own, or has it retained outside consultants? Tell me about who's putting the information together.
Yeah, the study area is so complex that Duke Energy feels like we need the highest expertise on this project. And in doing that, internally and externally with the consultant that has done these projects broadly across the United States, we feel that we owe that in the decision-making process on this project to utilize both our expertise in-house as well as consultants that are highly regarded for exciting projects.
One of the questions that a lot of folks have is, to what extent is Duke investigating other transmission paths that currently exist, utilizing existing rights of way, using perhaps upgrading existing lines, replacing and so forth. You know, there are a variety of lines. There's the 230 kV line that goes from Brevard to Disco Forest. There's, I believe, parallel. There's a 44 kV and 100 kV line that parallel each other, running through much of Henderson County. Is Duke investigating using any of those lines, upgrading them, replacing them, paralleling them?
As far as the sliding aspect, we do utilize existing or parallel and adjoining corridors as an opportunity area.
Wait, can you say that again?
If we have an existing infrastructure, as I mentioned, which we do, we utilize those corridors or adjoining to those corridors as opportunities for us, just like transmission lines.
What does that mean?
Well, I think it's two parts to it. I think the question is actually utilizing existing transmission line facilities.
Let's divide that into a couple of questions. Is Duke looking at utilizing existing transmission lines and facilities first?
I'll have Steve. Would you like to chime in?
We are looking. One of the things when we site a new transmission line, I've been doing this for many, many years, and we are always asked to look at siting transmission lines along existing infrastructure, whether it be transmission lines, roads, whatever it may be, gas lines, railroads. We're always, that's always a high priority. So when we do our preliminary route definition, we really try to find as many alternatives as we can parallel to existing infrastructure. Unfortunately, we're limited to a degree on that. We've got a number of alternatives that are paralleling existing transmission lines, but we're limited to an extent by the development around those existing lines. There's a lot of residential communities and homes that have been built up to the transmission lines. So we're limited, but we do, anywhere we can, where there's openings where we can parallel existing transmission lines and it's headed in the right direction, we do that.
So Duke is looking at paralleling existing lines. Are you looking at upgrading any existing lines? Is that possible?
Well, we actually do have a project, one of our projects in the overall portfolio of projects to make this happen is to rebuild an existing double circuit 100 kV line going from, it's called our Davison River line. Basically it comes out of the Greenville area and heads north to Marietta. So the Greenville-Marietta section of our Davison River 100 kV line, we're actually rebuilding that on the existing right-of-way and increasing its capacity as part of this project. We can't, the existing 100 kV double circuit power line, we need a new 230 kV source into this area. We need a strong bulk transmission source. And so just, and of course the existing 100 kV lines are in the area serve a retail load. There's numerous retail substations, so they serve a retail load. So we can't just go out there and do away with those facilities and replace it with this bulk 230 kV transmission line. We can't stack two 230 kV circuits on top of two 115 kV circuits, put all that in the same corridor for several reasons. It's really not technically very feasible to do that. We put that many circuits on one structure, and then it creates reliability issues for us. And then we have all of that on one circuit, and if we lose a structure, we lose all of that infrastructure at one time. So for a number of reasons, we're limited.
So when does Duke expect to have a decision on this proposed transmission, on its preferred transmission?
We're supposed to go public with the preferred route early October. When would you file an application with respect to this? Is it early October?
It'll be first of next year. We'll actually file an application. We have to spend the time between after we select a preferred route late September, early October. Then it'll take time from then to the end of the year to develop all the documentation and what we call the line siting and environmental report to submit to the commission. So all that takes some time. That's what that time period is.
We've heard a lot of questions and comments regarding putting the line on the ground. My first question is, has Duke investigated the possibility of putting the line on the ground?
We have done some analysis of that. The reality is that undergrounding technology for bulk power transmission for a 230 kilovolt transmission line is technically difficult, requires very talented expertise, and is very expensive. So, can you repeat your last part of that? It takes a lot of very skilled, talented. It takes people that career and ability to actually make it happen. There's only just a very few companies that actually do it.
And it's generally done, excuse me just a second. I would like to hear the answer, and I know a lot of folks in the audience would like to hear the answer as well. So please let Mr. Wilson finish his answer. Appreciate it. Thank you.
You know, we have to look at cost very carefully. We can't just go out there and do something, and choose an alternative that's, numerous times more expensive. We have an obligation to serve our customers economically. Recent 2012, the Edison Electric Institute prepared a study of undergrounding, transmission, and the cost, and where it's being done, all that. And that conclusion, study concluded that undergrounding was roughly approximately 7 times more expensive than overhead. So, we've kept up with undergrounding over the years. I've kept up with it over the years, and it's a very expensive endeavor. The thing that makes it more difficult in this area particularly is the terrain. The terrain in this area is very, very rugged and obviously hilly. You have to cut a trench 16 to 20 foot wide at the base with side slopes in order to bury these conductors. They're actually installed in a concrete, what we call concrete duct bank. So they're encased in concrete. So you've got this wide ditch. Obviously, when you have serious slopes, you have cut slopes on both sides you have to worry about, keep stable. So that's a very complicated thing. And then the other aspect of it is that you have to actually install manholes about every 1,600 to 2,000 feet because the conductor is so heavy you can't put so much of that underground conductor on the reel. This is large insulated copper conductor. So you end up having approximately 14 by 20 foot manholes for each circuit, 1,600 to 2,000 feet apart all along the transmission line. Where you cross streams, you can't just dig across streams, obviously. And there are a lot of streams up here, a lot of water resources. So in those areas, you actually have to directionally bore, just like you see the cable TV companies boring along the side of the road. Gas can put small pipes along the side of the road with the directional boring. We have to do that. The transmission, it's a large pipe. And we have to directional bore, which is more expensive than just the regular direct burial under these roads and under these streams. So that adds to the cost. So all that makes it very expensive, very technically challenging. And lastly, what do you do if it fails underground? Because you can see it over here, you can't see it underground. So you have, the restoration effort and time to make a repair underground is substantial. When it's overhead, we can generally repair it half a day. When it's underground, we've got a locate problem. We've got to repair concrete duct bank potentially. We've got to pull cable out, put a new cable in, bring these, what I was trying to make about expertise, bring these people in and splice this. And there are not many people in the world that splice this. The splicing of this cable is extraordinarily complex. You have to wrap it, and when you wrap all this cable, you have to be very, very careful that there's no error or no imperfections in it whatsoever. So they spend days wrapping this stuff to splice it together in these concrete vaults with air conditioning, humidity conditioning, because you can't let moisture get into it. All that is very complicated. And that's what I mean by this is a very complex. It takes very high-end talent and skills to do it. There are not so many of them in the country. So reliability is a very, very significant concern. If you lose that, you're out for days. That forces us to actually need to put in redundancy. Where you see underground like this, is in these large urban areas like New York City, Chicago, Boston. There are some applications for underground. There's usually a sub-transmission voltage, something like a 69 kV or 115 kV. It's very rare to put volt transmission underground in an inner city like that. But there is quite a bit of it. That technology has actually been around for a long time. And in these inner cities, it's looped from substation to substation. You got dual feed and all that. You don't have that same scenario in a rural cross-country situation.
Excuse me, we're going to have public comment later. Let me go ahead and ask my next question. Is undergrounding an all or nothing concept? Can you go above ground and then?
You can mix it up. The problem is, in order to detect a fault where it is, you end up needing breaker stations. You need some protection on the ends. So there's a very good chance we have to put, you have to have a dip structure coming out of the underground, go back to overhead, a substation on each end to make that happen, a switching station on each end to make that happen with breakers. So there is some additional impact as far as those stations on each end, but you can drop down for a short distance and come up. And if we run into a situation on this project where there's just no way to get through an area because there's unsurmountable obstacles and there's no other choice, then we possibly have to do that.
Possibly go down and under.
Possibly have to do it. We don't see it right now, but we're still investigating in detail all the alternatives. So if it were to happen, we could possibly have to do it.
We've also heard a lot of questions about using public lands where possible. Has Duke investigated the possibility of constructing this transmission line on any public lands in this area? Is that part of your analysis?
That's part of the analysis. You know, we don't have the right to, we have to ask permission from the state, obtain permission from the state to cross state lands. But we do have one of our alternatives that does cross part of, for about 1 mile approximately, part of the Green River gangways. So, you know, that's parallel to the existing transmission line. We felt like we could get permission from the state, and we will have to go to council of state and get that approved. We felt like we could get that approved through there. We've met with the Wildlife Resources Commission, and we've shown them that. We've asked them if there's other areas of potential crossing. Problem is, when you get further east, you get into the more rugged terrain. There's there's endangered species there. The northern long-eared bat, for example. There's some plant rare species there, and so forth. And you know, so it's environmentally impacting to be out there. So they really wanting us to be out in that area. We really don't want to be in that area either, because that terrain going across the Green River Gorge is enormously steep, and it would be very difficult to build a transmission line through that area. Then when you come out on the northern side of that, you're back into developed areas and apple orchards and so forth. So it really didn't look very attractive north of there either as you come out of the state game lands there. So for those reasons, you know, we're keeping our alternative we have now. The second goes parallel to the existing transmission line. We feel like that we can make that happen, and West Wildlife Resources Commission seeing that they're willing to work with us on that.
So you mentioned the Council of State and Wildlife Resource Commission. Any other state agencies that you have to go through in order to use public lands, or those the general entities you have to talk to?
The lead agency there for the state would be the Wildlife Resources Commission, and then it would be submitted up through there to the Council of State. Of course, we'd have to work with the state property office on the easement as well.
We've also questions and concerns about putting them along the highway or other road corridors where there's already the right of way, but it may not be a transmission line. In coming up with the proposed routes, did you examine, and to what extent did you examine using these existing highways, road corridors, I-26, any of the other road corridors that go through the area?
We did look, highway corridors and existing transmission corridors are opportunity areas for us. So we did look at road corridors, adjoining road corridors as an opportunity area. We specifically looked at I-26 and met with DOT about, matter of fact, even trying to utilize their controlled access easement within I-26. With the terrain constraints, also the curvature of the road and future expansion of I-26 in certain sections, we decided it was not viable to be within the controlled access of I-26. We also looked at adjoining I-26 as
At what? At what?
adjoining the I-26 controlled access corridor. There's a lot of grade issues, vertical or nearly vertical cut slopes and fill slopes. So the terrain is difficulty also adjoining the I-26 corridor, and then obviously in straighter sections where we have interchanges, there's a lot of commercial development also on those interchanges, which physically restrict us.
So you said you met with NCDOT. What other agencies have you talked to about using highways and roads?
Well, we looked at some of the highways and roads that we looked at, mainly were the highways and roads going north in a similar direction to where we would need to get the line. Highway 25 is also another controlled access highway, and we talked to DOT also about that. And again, the curves and the limited room and vegetation and the slopes of the terrain were also a very negative impact in trying to go along Highway 25. We also looked at the scenic highway as far as paralleling Highway 11, but obviously the scenic characteristics of that and the visibility, we try to avoid Highway 11 also.
This goes back to a question that we talked about a little earlier in terms of underground. Did your undergrounding analysis, does it look at undergrounding along a road or a highway corridor? Was that part of your analysis?
Right now, we're looking at it early on more of a cost per mile basis, and it's no cost, and the impact's going to be what they are, no matter whether we're beside a interstate highway or not. So we haven't looked at that level of detail on it. The problem with, you have the same issue, the width of the right-of-way on underground and heavily sloping terrain is not as narrow as you might think. The width of right-of-way, permanent right-of-way would be roughly approximately 50 feet. The side slopes, and all that I was talking about earlier, and the ability to be able to get construction vehicles down along the corridor to be able to build the line, we would likely need another 50 feet of construction access, temporary easement in order to build. So you're talking about something that's 100 feet going down. So we run into the very same things with commercial development, with residential development that's backed up to the interstate. We run, and of course the interchanges are all very difficult to get through. So we run into the same obstacles underground when we run along I-26 as we do overhead. The other thing about I-26 from an underground perspective is really not very much shorter. It's not very much shorter. The distance, you might think going up I-26 is the most straight path. If you look at a map of I-26 coming from the intersection of NC 11 and I-26 up to the actual plant. It starts and it actually goes due north, and then it cuts almost perpendicular, goes to the left, goes to the west, and then comes back up. So, and then of course it winds a lot as well. So when you measure the distance, it's roughly about 40 miles. So it's not very much shorter.
So if I understand, a constructed line would be about 50 foot right of way, but you would need 100 in order to construct it.
That's right.
There's a lot of question about the design of the transmission towers. What can you tell us about what they may look like and so forth?
We have, the input we've gotten from the public, from elected officials throughout, been pretty consistent throughout, is that we need to be more flexible with the types of structures that we use and the placement of those structures. We've heard that loudly, and we appreciate that input. We are going to be flexible with these structures. We're going to, where we're in near residential areas, we're in areas where the line is going to be very visible. We're going to use single poles, monopole type construction in those areas to minimize, to the extent practical, the impact that the line will have in those areas. We will work with the property owners. We have critical land uses that whether it be property lines and whatnot. We'll try to work with you to position structures as best we can. Greenways, we've been asked about greenways. We would love to work with the elected officials and the communities on joint venture with greenways. That's a great use of transmission resource so we're very interested in being flexible and working with you all to minimize the impact. We recognize this line's got to go somewhere. Wherever it goes, we know that we need to be flexible and reduce the impact to the extent practical.
Now you mentioned monopoles. Some folks know what that is, some don't. Can you explain what a monopole is?
Well, a monopole it's a single pole. It actually sits on a concrete foundation in the ground. So it's a single pole, somewhat like this microphone. It's a single pole in the ground, and then at the top there are arms that the conductor is supported by arms. And so the lattice structures we use are frames. There's a lot of angled steel that is webbed together to make a lattice structure. The lattice structure is much broader, real big at the base. So these monopoles are a much smaller footprint. So they impact the land less, and our customers have continually told us that they're more aesthetically better than the lattice towers.
How tall are monopoles compared to lattice towers or other poles?
There's not a large difference in height because
how tall are they?
Roughly, on average, they'll probably be about 140 feet. It will vary. That varies tremendously depending upon the terrain and the distance between structures. As we get into more level terrain, those heights will drop down. As you're in more rugged terrain and you're having to span further, particularly as you get into the bottoms, you need a fairly tall structure in those bottoms to be able to span. So the height will vary significantly from roughly 80 to 90 foot tall to 100, could be as tall as 150 foot, 60 foot.
Has Duke, just in terms of the equipment that you're looking at, has Duke considered using ACCR cables or other types of sort of new or innovative technology that
We're actually planning to use what's called ACSS trapezoidal conductor on this project, which allows us to have a smaller conductor and only one conductor per phase of the line here. These transmission lines are 3-phase, so you got a double circuit line, so you got 3 conductors on each side of the structure, 1 circuit on each side of the structure. For the capacity we're seeking here, if we did use ACSS trap wire conductor, which is a newer technology, we would have to use larger and perhaps 2 conductors per phase. So that reduces the visual impact of the line.
You may have said this and I missed it, but what type of material are these towers going to be constructed out of?
The last towers will be galvanized steel, what you just your normal 90-degree angle steel is wet together to basically assemble a lattice tower. It's just a bunch of angled steel put together to make a frame. Steel poles, single poles, are fabricated completely by a manufacturer, and they're basically they take what's called rolled steel and they bend it and weld it together to make a pole, what we call a polyram 12-sided steel pole.
So the poles being about 100 feet tall or so, are these poles going to have aircraft warning lights on top of them or anything like that?
We may have to install some, if we end up selecting the alternative route, the segment that goes in front of the airport, the actual airport, we may have to put some marker balls on those wires just for air traffic safety. But these heights are not tall enough to require lights, and we're not putting any structures on the very top of mountains. I know you sometimes see communication towers on the very tops of mountains. We don't do that. We try, part of our siting process is to try to site alternative routes so that they don't pass right over the top of the mountain, but go down a little bit, crossover, so that it blends in better with the background.
You mentioned communication facilities. Are communication facilities designed to go on top of any of these towers, or?
We have no plans to install communication facilities other than our internal communication, which is just the overhead ground wire. The existing shield wire that's at the top will be a communication mechanism for us in technology.
We've heard a lot of questions about dangers to public health and wildlife associated with high voltage transmission lines. Can you talk to me about how Duke has taken the considerations of public health and wildlife into account in selecting the proposed routes, and then what factor, how that's going to play into your preferred route, if at all?
Okay, well, there's been a lot of studies over the last 30 years. I believe you're talking about electromagnetic fields. There's been numerous studies over the last 30 years on that. Congress actually chartered the National Institute for Environmental Health to look at that a few years back. So a combination of all these studies have been performed and evaluated, and the result has been that it's inconclusive. So there's no clear supporting studies that show that it's a health impact. We actually have, as far as livestock, horses, cattle, we have horse farms and cattle ranches all over our systems. A lot of it down in Florida. There has been no reported problems with the livestock, and being able to cohabitate the transmission line. As far as people, you know, one of the things we try to do, as Randy mentioned earlier, is to try to stay away from businesses and homes with the route to the extent we can. It's impossible to stay away from all of that, but we do, you know, that proximity to homes and businesses is a very, very high priority, and it always is weighted very high in our analysis. So we make the effort to select a route that is far away from what is out there as far as residences and businesses as we feasibly can, recognizing that this is a heavily developed area.
I have a question here concerned about mountain stabilization. You do horizontal cutting on sides of hills and mountains and so forth. Can you talk to me about how you approach that and how you make sure that we'll cross the side of the mountain, not come down to some point in time?
Well, you know, we try to minimally disturb. So what we do, we have a clearing and erosion control plan that we submit to the Department of Environmental and Natural Resources and to the local counties that we obtain approval. And in that plan, it's a technical plan, we design so that we don't erode the land, that we don't have problems with losing the soil, so to speak, on steep slopes. So we take measures, environmental control measures to avoid that from happening. So that'll be something that we'll be looking at, and that DENR will be, for example, Department of Environmental and Natural Resources will be looking at with us as well, very, very closely, to make sure that jointly we're doing the best we can, the right thing, and minimizing the potential for that to occur.
Another question that got submitted this evening, and also that I had written as well, is has Duke explored using alternative sources of energy, such as wind or solar, in this region in order to
Yes, renewable energy, wind, solar is probably one of the fastest growing segments of our supply portfolio in terms of, you know, where it was 10 years ago to what we're adding. But in the Western Carolinas, there are several challenges. Windmills need wind, and that exists on ridgetops. And in North Carolina, there's a law that doesn't allow windmills to be placed on ridgetops. So in that case, there's a renewable resource that we cannot deploy along the ridges, and that's part of the regulations and rules we're subject to. So when you turn to solar facilities, solar requires, in general, a fairly large amount of flat, cleared land. There's been a lot of solar development. Like I've said, we're in one of the top states in the country in terms of the rate of growth of commercial scale solar. We're adding solar at a very quick pace, putting in some of the largest solar facilities in the eastern seaboard are happening right here in North Carolina. But those facilities take a large amount of flat, cleared land. So for example, our Warsaw facility in the eastern part of the state is approximately 65 megawatts. It's about 1/10 the maximum output of the plant that we're building in Asheville. And it takes for 1/10 to produce that maximum output over 500 square acres of flat cleared land. This part of the state does not lend itself well to large tracts of flat, clear, developable land. So the transmission lines actually help import that eastern renewable generation that's being developed in the state and have the ability to bring that east to west, because it's not feasible or practicable to develop it in the mountains the way it is in the east, where you have not near the number of trees and not near the topography that you have in the west. So while it's a big part of our portfolio and it's growing, in this situation, in terms of developing it in the west, it's not as practical as it is in the east.
Another question. I have another question here. Wanting to know what steps does Duke do to make sure that their maps are accurate? What verification process do you go through?
Well, as I explained before, the data that we receive is from a lot of agencies. So the data we receive is from those agencies. The aerial mapping we receive is based on Google mapping and other aerial photography that we get from the counties. And they aren't real-time mapping. Some of them are about a year old. Some of them are 2 years old. Also, some of the tax map data that we get that also from the county. We update it constantly to make sure the tax map information is correct. But we do rely on some of the agencies to provide that data to us, and we do update it as quickly as we can.
Okay, so will a preferred, once Duke arrives at a preferred path, will Duke be walking that line, making sure that that map is accurate, as up to date as possible?
Aerial mapping and actually flying the line is definitely an option. Once we have a preferred route,
Flying the line is helicopter stuff?
correct.
We've already flown all of these segments using what we call LiDAR, live emitting laser detecting. It's a ranging technology. Basically, a laser beam that is mounted to a helicopter that flies over, or an airplane, flies over the alternative routes and actually rasterizes a three-dimensional image of everything on the alternative routes. We've actually done that. And so when we select the preferred route, we will process that data for that preferred route, and we'll have very recent three-dimensional data on that selected route. It will allow us to look at it very, very carefully. That was flown earlier this year. So that'll be a tool we'll use to make sure that we're identifying everything out there in addition to field reconnaissance. And then, of course, after we select the route and we make the announcement, we're going to do a survey on the ground of that transmission line route. So we'll actually send surveyors out there, and they will run a center line survey, and site surveys, topography, and all that. In addition to our environmental survey, and we'll do it after.
And if I could just add one thing, part of this process of the public comment period, because we know the data is not, always 2015 data. It is, could be a year or more older, but it's from the sources that we have available. So the public comment period is to hear from the public, for them to identify, and we have received many, many comments and many very specific comments that we are using in the process to select these routes, information that we don't have. That's one of the reasons we do it. So many of you, and we've received over 9,000 comments, have provided us very specific information about new development, historic features, historic buildings, information about endangered species, lots of information, and all of that information is being used in our evaluation process before we do select the preferred route.
Mr. Wyatt pointed out to me a second ago that this Q&A has gone on for about an hour and a half. And and I want to make sure that we have enough time for as many people to make their public comments as possible. So I'm going to wrap up with this question. Tell us what comes next in terms of the time frame and what information, once you decide on the preferred route, what type of information will be available to the public at that time?
Well, as soon as we do select the preferred route, we are going to notify all the property owners that we reached out to originally, all the property owners, within the preferred route. We'll make that information available on our website, our multiple websites. So we have our interactive map, and we also have another website with information about the project. And then Randy and his team will be conducting and developing the siting report that will be a part of the application.
And that application supporting data will be publicly available?
Yes.
It'll be, we usually put it in a couple of locations so that the public can have access to it. Of course, it's part of what we submit to the Utility Commission with our application.
Okay. I'm going to conclude the Q&A session now so that we can get on to public comment. I want to thank you all for coming up here tonight, talking with us. You've answered some questions. I'm sure they've generated some more, but I appreciate you being here and giving us the answers. And we're going to tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take about a 2-minute break to listen to WNC to make sure that we get as many people through this process as possible. Mr. Steerwalt, you may proceed.
My name is Mark Steerwalt, and I'm the Southern Regional Director for Mountain True. We're North Carolina's oldest environmental advocacy nonprofit. We champion resilient forests, clean waters, and healthy communities throughout western North Carolina. We focus on a core set of issues: sensible land use, restoring public forests, protecting water quality, and renewable energy. All of these have a high impact on the environmental health and long-term prosperity of our region, and Duke's plan counters to much of what we are striving for in western North Carolina. Duke Energy's modernization plan is anything but modern. Instead, it locks our region in a fossil fuel-powered future and disrupts property owners, families, sensitive habitats, and the visual beauty of our mountains. In light of the tremendous opposition that this proposal has generated, we strongly encourage you to go back to the drawing board, analyze all of the possible alternatives, and find the one that causes the least negative impact to our region for now and for future generations. We call on Duke Energy to undertake a rigorous analysis of these alternatives that reduce the size of the produced natural gas plant and the transmission line. The smallest footprint and impact should be Duke's starting point, not an afterthought.
Investigate the low-cost methods of reducing the need for electricity generation, like energy efficiency, demand-side management. Utilities around the country are meeting a 1 or 2% load with these kinds of efficiency.
While Duke's target goals remain flat at about 0.3%. Has Duke considered the significant role that renewable distributed energy generation like hydropower and rooftop solar might play? And specifically, has Duke considered purchasing the 380 megawatts of existing hydropower available in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee that is currently available for purchase? Also, has Duke considered building energy storage capacity in western North Carolina? These are truly modern solutions that should be considered. Any natural gas plant transmission line should be sized to provide energy for the electricity needed in this region only after all renewable energy generation and energy efficiency is maximized. Mountain True intends to utilize every available resource to protect our community, our land, and our environment. We are a proud leader, along with other grassroots groups and community members in the Carolina Land Coalition, which believes that this project is not in the best interest of the communities, the landowners, and the ratepayers of North and South Carolina. We ask the public staff to help us protect our land and challenge Duke's plans.
Mr. Blackwell, you're next. You have 3 minutes.
I have a question for staff. Thank you. What has Duke done to make amends for previous inconsistencies of information shared with us, the public, and to ensure the public is getting full, transparent information in regards to this modernization project? Recent legal proceedings in regards to Duke Energy's coal ash showed that the company was knowingly violating water protection laws for years, resulting in civil and criminal charges. When will Duke release full information and justification for this project? And are there any internal measures taken into consideration to ensure that it is complete and full information to the public?
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I will answer that question on behalf of the public staff. Thomas Hill, if you can go ahead and come down as I'm answering. The public staff will review the application once it is filed, and there is a preferred path that is chosen by Duke. We have engineers that will evaluate it. We have accountants that will evaluate it. Economists, we will evaluate both the need. We will also evaluate the economics of it. We will do a full investigation. We will hire outside expertise if we need to. Duke has the burden of proving that it needs the line, that it needs the gas plant. And if our investigation shows that we believe that they don't, then our case will state so in front of the Utilities Commission. The Utilities Commission is then charged with making up its mind based on the competing cases in front of it. But we will fully investigate that. We will ask the questions. We will make the discovery request. There will probably be hundreds of them in terms of data, documents, every study that was done to justify the preferred site. If we have questions with respect to alternative sites that might have been cheaper or less impactful, we will investigate those and make any appropriate recommendations to the Commission. But that is the investigation that we'll do, and it will begin once we receive, once the company, I should say when, if the company files an application, which they've indicated I think would be in the early part of next year. Thank you. Before you start, if John Fisher, Robert Parsons, and Jane Eaton, if y'all could get ready. Mr. Hill?
Yes, I have a prepared statement that I gave to the lady here, and if you pass that out, I'm just going to hit the high spots on that. I'm not really going to address that as I presented it. I feel like I'm attending some kind of political event where Duke is trying to convince me to vote for them. And I have been to a number of these meetings, and they present non-quantifiable data. They're building this huge matrix, but it's the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. They do not provide quantitative data necessary to justify what they're trying to do. They have not justified the need for this transmission line. They've certainly not justified the environmental impact it's going to have. I've listened to them time and again, and I want them to listen to us. And our message is, we don't want those 150-foot steel towers in Henderson County. We don't want them. Okay? If you have a justifiable need for a transmission line, and we don't think they do. The data that they've given us so far shows that the usage from Lake Julian is down. It's not up, okay, from where it's been in the past. If you have a justifiable need, then Duke needs to put this thing underground. And I don't want to hear all this nonsense about how it can't be done and this and that and the other. Underground takes a very small amount of right-of-way, and it's present technology. This is not 1960. That's what they're giving us a solution. They're giving us a solution that applies back in 1960. This is modern times. People in New England, in remote areas in Lake Champlain, are putting their power lines underground and on lake beds. It can be done. They're doing it in San Francisco, and Duke doesn't want to do this. What they've put out so far is generalized comments. They make us think that they have everything justified. They do not. They're talking about underground being so expensive. That's not true either. The strides being made in this area are tremendous. It's up to Duke to do this thing in a modern, efficient way. I want you public people to staff to stand up for us, okay? You have the authority. You have the authority to call experts and have you open their books and make that information public. And we want you to hire independent people to come in and make this assessment about the need and about the best way to do it, and to have them stop doing what's wrong.
And Mr. Robert Parsons is up next.
Thank you. I've been a resident of Henderson County for 34 years. Currently live in Saluda, directly on my property is directly on one of the proposed routes. I've been a Duke ratepayer for 40 years, and I'm a Duke stockholder, and I would vote against this transmission line. I think alternatives for these plans have to be explored. I am an electrical contractor and work with Duke Power on a daily basis. There's some great folks, good people, very professional. But I would say in the June or July, I'm not sure which, Electrical Contractor magazine, there's an article on underground transmission lines and how popular they're becoming. The article cites 4 to 5 times cost on underground transmissions. And I understand things fail, no doubt, but give me statistics. When you say something fails, does it fail every 5 years? Does it fail every 10 years? Are there not preventive maintenance? I know on high voltage lines in large plants I've worked in, we do preventive maintenance on lines, we do testing to see if the lines will fail. So how often is that? I'd also like to have some study done on the types of towers, compact towers that they use in Europe, which is much, much lower and less visible than the ones we use in the United States. Thank you.
Mr. Robert Parsons.
I'm a citizen here, and I want to follow up with what John said about the single pole or the pylon towers, that they could be 50 feet tall rather than 14 stories. They've used those in Europe, and if they are going to have to look at the possibility of a blended use, maybe some underground, some above ground, that these tried and true technologies can be used that are maybe could keep things under the canopy and might be part of a blended solution.
Jane, you're next, and if Phoebe Blackwell, Mark Eden, and Westcott Burlingame could get ready. Miss Eden.
Jane Eden. I live in Columbus, North Carolina. The most favored solution by all is for Duke to cancel the proposed transfer line project. That said, there is a second best solution. A transfer line between a new substation in Campobello and the Asheville plant can be built with reduced damage to the environment and the economy of both South Carolina and North Carolina by using existing right-of-ways. Widening an existing highway to accommodate increased traffic is less damaging to the environment than building a new highway. The same is true for electric transfer lines. Page 2, refer to page 2 of my booklet, is an overview of every transfer line proposed by Duke. It is important to note that none of those blue lines on the image can make use of an existing right-of-way because none exist. In contrast, the yellow line, also proposed by Duke, connects with existing transfer line right-of-ways for 26.71 miles of the 40.77 miles from Campobello to Asheville. The red line overlaying the yellow line shows the location of said existing right-of-ways. Page 3. The Excel sheet demonstrates the length of each of the proposed yellow route sections and its accompanying length of existing right-of-ways. Page 4 and 5, this is just a close-up of the yellow Duke proposed route next to an existing right-of-way corridor. Page 6, a third solution not proposed by Duke is the use of an existing right-of-way in the vicinity of Cleveland, South Carolina. This is the pink line, and it runs uninterrupted, mostly through uninhabited areas, all the way up to Asheville. The damage to the environment has already been done a long time ago. Page 7. That particular pink color right-of-way crosses the existing 500 kilovolt line originating at the Oconee nuclear plant. Maybe that crossing should be the location of the substation instead of Campobello.
Phoebe Blackwell. And Mr. Markey is up next.
Landowner here and disabled vet, so how will Duke Energy prevent pollution as the path is clear-cut through rich cove forests and fragile ecosystems on steep hillsides, resulting in silt, sedimentation, toxicity, and drainage into our pristine streams, rivers, and bodies of water like Lake Summit, Green River Watershed, and Greenville Watershed. And these impact the whole state. So that's a real concern of the water. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Blackwell, Mr. Eaton, and Westcott Burlingame, and John Clancy, you're going up next.
Good evening. Appreciate having the time, the opportunity to speak to you tonight. My wife and I own and reside in a historic preservation home in the North Packard Association / Carolyn Farms community. We live at 835 Jackson Grove Road in Columbus, North Carolina, Polk County. A home that just celebrated its bicentennial. Yes, it's 200 years old. But this really isn't about my home. It's about the historical nature of our community. Because you see, my home is the baby brother of two other homes built by Revolutionary War Captain Thomas Jackson. In 1780, Captain Jackson built a home which is now the Slater's home, the Sowers home, which is the proposed line 19 directly impacts. He then built a larger home in the 1790s, presently owned and resided on bleachers in my neighborhood. And lastly, he built my home for his younger son, James, one of his 9 children, to raise his family. The 2B power line goes immediately next door to my property. All 3 of these 200-year-old homes are actively inhabited and maintained today, and they're not on Duke Power's identified sites of historical properties. Again, this is not about any one home, it's about the historical nature of our community. You should know that Captain Thomas Jackson's grandfather, John Jackson, received a land grant in 1753, either sides of the North Packet River in South Carolina and North Carolina. The Jackson family were the founders rather, and built the original Jackson Grove Methodist Church in the early 1800s. Many Jackson family members were buried there along with slaves, and his power lines are immediately adjacent to this church. They're immediately adjacent to this church. The proposed power lines are also adjacent to another historic church founded by the slaves of the Bessie Jackson House and the Four Corners House. This was a pre-Civil War church. The power lines go directly adjacent to it, and the slaves are buried there as well. Neither church is identified on Duke Power's historical sites map. The 2A route, with either leg chosen, will put a scar on 250 years of history. If an interstate has...
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Thank you.
Westcott Burlington, and John Clancy is next.
I'm Wes Burlingame, and I'm from here in Hendersonville, North Carolina. I'm also a retired nurseryman with 30 years experience in growing plants for damaged sites. And as we all know, sites that are under these power lines are going to be greatly damaged. How can Duke justify the disruption the proposed power line will cause to our historic sites and special places in our area? I'm thinking of sites like the Carl Sandburg home, which draws so many visitors to our area, the many summer camps which generations of folks return to over the years, and the other sites that have history for families. We just heard one, especially the multi-generational family farms here, and the small businesses. My family stands strongly against the impact of the transmission line, for example, because it will pass over a unique area known as the Kingdom of Happy Land. Just above Lake Summit in Zirconia, it was colonized by a group of ex-slaves in 1869. They followed a Moses-like preacher at the end of the Civil War, collecting free slaves as they walked through the southern states. The group swelled to over 200 individuals. They elected a king, a queen, cleared their land, built a palace and a village, raised crops in the spring-fed valley below, and worked as staff on the 5 stagecoach inns along the Saluda Grade. The colony dissolved in 1905 when the railroad came. The remnants of the palace are still there, some of the foundations of homes, springs, and crop terraces. Remaining untouched for 60 to 100 years, now the world has turned into a rich cove wilderness, which holds a great diversity of rare native plants, orchids, trilliums, mayaples, many others, and 100-year-old trees. Many questions are still unanswered about this special piece of Black history and culture, this Kingdom of Happy Land. The transmission lines are sited directly over what were the agricultural lands and entrance to this colony. So, what can be done to protect these historic and fragile sites? The old towns, the old churches, the graveyards, the historic houses and properties. How do we preserve them in the face of Duke Energy's plans?
Clancy, you're up next, and William Vine, Gary Gray, and Susan Troutman, y'all are coming up next.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Clancy. I'm from Zaconia, North Carolina. We got the notice, the dreaded notice from Duke, that they were thinking about running a line through our beautiful area in the foothills of western North Carolina. Frankly, I thought that Duke was out of their minds. There are so many other ways in which they can bring electricity to Asheville. Duke's plan actually is nonsensical. They're building a plant in South Carolina, Campobello, South Carolina, to ship electricity back to Asheville. If they go through with this plan and go through the foothills of western North Carolina, it will entail tearing down tens of thousands of life-sustaining trees and replacing them with scorched earth and terrible, ugly towers and electrical lines. It's an absurd plan. The first thing they did to put this plan into effect was to buy some land in South Carolina. And for some inexplicable reason, they paid twice the going rate for this land. And this was even before, the most inexplicable thing is that this was even before they gave this information to any of the agencies which had to give them approval. The agency, the commission in North Carolina and South Carolina. In fact, they were quite arrogant in doing this, because if these commissions did not give their approval, the whole project would be dead, and they would be left with this land, this white elephant in Campobello, South Carolina. Then the next thing they did was hold a series of sham town hall meetings where they claimed they wanted our input. But they really were nothing but infomercials for Duke. And they told you and I fairy tales during these meetings. You know what they actually, this is not hearsay, what they actually told me at these hearings. You will hardly notice the 14-story steel towers. They will blend in with the landscape. Really good? And how about the biggest fairy tale of all? That they will not affect real estate values. Ladies and gentlemen, they have completely shut down the real estate industry. Nothing is moving. Nothing is being sold.
Mr. Clancy, I'm sorry, your time is up.
It's bad for the people. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for the economy.
Thank you, Mr. Clancy. William Vine, Gary Gray.
Okay, I'm William Vine. Thanks to the staff for participating in this meeting.
Can you lean up to the mic? Thanks.
Okay, and unfortunately, we're not able to ask questions to Duke because unfortunately Duke did not fully answer the questions of the staff, and we would be here to correct that
deficiency. Mr. Vine, Duke is willing to take questions if you have a question for
Oh, yeah, I have one, yes. All right. The questions to Duke are the following. Currently, the annual utilization rate predicted for the new gas generator will be about 26%. Duke plan to do with the unused 74% portion of that utilization? Will it be exported via the transmission lines to other areas of the country? Will the DEP ratepayers be paying for this exported power in their base rate as well as likely their utilization rate?
So if I didn't answer that clearly in the first time on the stand, we plan to utilize that at a much higher rate than 26%. Some of that power will be consumed locally in the west, and at times some of that will be consumed by the east. But we don't plan on selling it out of state. It will stay in the Carolinas. Today, the West enjoys what limited import we have of bringing renewables and nuclear generation that's sitting in the East into the West. They are definitely, for the last several decades, have been importers of power. With this plan, there are times where the East will have some of the benefits of that plan, just like the West now shares the benefits from the East, but there will be no use of this plant. It's not being built. Its intent is not to take this and sell it out of state. So just to be clear, it's staying in state, it's staying in the West for a large part, and when the East benefits from it, it'll be similar to the way...
It won't trickle down to Campobello, because how else are you going to get it to the East if it doesn't go through Campobello? And in part B of my question, which since I'm running out of time, I'll quickly ask, is what's happened to all the power generation that's in and around the Salem area, South Carolina area, that's within 500, which is in 50 miles of the Pisgah Forest 230 kV lines to Asheville. Why aren't we using that route and that source of electricity in this area? So you can finish answering your question, and I appreciate if you answer this question.
Yeah, well, just to respond, we're out of time. The power, some of the things mentioned in terms of using other sources of power, so I heard, use the hydro or use power that's over here. All of those sources mentioned are on the other side of the constraint. So we need incremental import capability to be able to use those sources, whether it's the hydro further up in the west or whether it's some of the sources down in South Carolina. So it's not a matter of using them, it's a matter of having the import capability to bring those into the western part of the grid, which we currently just don't have.
Thank you. Gary Gray. And Susan Troutman and Jay Rogers, you are coming up next. Mr. Gray.
Hello, my name is Gary Gray. My wife Karen and I live in Section 10B on the west side of Hendersonville. To the North Carolina public staff and others responsible for making tonight's meeting possible, thank you. I am a native North Carolinian, a beach guy who always wanted to be in the mountains. My wife and I always dreamed of one day living in this area. About 5 years ago, we put our life savings together and we began to live our dream. Just 50 days ago, that dream started to unravel. Who would have thought a letter from your utility provider could shatter your lifelong dream? It's the high voltage transmission line that we're against. Our main concern is the negative impact to this area. I also have yet to see, even tonight, convincing evidence that the transmission line is needed. I have 36 years in the power industry, including 12 years as a cost analyst in the gas turbine industry. And as I see it, Duke's planned 2 peaker unit backup system is a poorly designed one. By their own admission, 2 peaker units is not enough if the main turbine system goes down, thus creating a need to import and also requiring a new substation and a transmission line. A parallel system or additional peaker units would be a better design, eliminating the transmission line and just as cost effective. Back in July, I was at one of the hearings or one of the meetings and asked about survey marks, and I was told that they would pick the route and they would survey later. However, back in March, surveyors started showing up and marking roads less than 1,000 feet from our driveway. Using GPS coordinates, I found similar marks that tie those transmission routes throughout Henderson and Polk County. When Duke speaks, there is either a pattern of being wrong or there's a major trust issue or both. This bothers me as an investor in Duke Energy And as my grandfather, who spent 30 plus years with Carolina Power and Light and also invested in them in stock, to the Commission, please, please require an independent study. Armed with independent results, if it still warrants the construction of the transmission line, the Commission can lessen the negative impact by granting approval only if they stall it in the current easement. Hendersonville city officials speaking directly with Duke recently suggested the same and requested Duke work greenways into their plan. Kudos to the city. Duke says that they want to put the transmission line in a route that impacts the least amount of people while simultaneously impacting the environment the least. Reality is that's not possible. In order to protect our pristine natural resources and mountain beauty, the best route would be through one of the heavy congested areas. The areas with the least amount of people are where our camps thrive, our apples grow, our precious wildlife live, our creeks flow, and where the beauty is some of the best in the world. Once destroyed, they're forever lost. Duke has never considered, at least publicly, the possibility of no, nor will they when they submit their application to you. The Commission can and should say no. Thank you for listening.
Susan Troutman and Jay Rogers and James Hinrichsen. You're up next, Ms. Rogers.
Thank you. I am Susan Troutman, Chief Operating Officer of Camp Luther Ridge, 2511 Hendersonville Road, Arden, North Carolina. I am speaking tonight to express our strong opposition to the possibility of Duke Energy running an electric transmission line on the easternmost proposed routing, which runs through the middle of the campus of Luther Ridge. Clearing a 150-foot path with 150-foot steel towers would do irreversible harm to Camp Luther Ridge. Luther Ridge has been part of the community and landscape of this area of Crescent Hill, the highest point in South Buncombe County, for more than 60 years. It is a well-established ministry and place apart where generations have come to live, learn, and worship in community and individually, a place where they have been equipped for service in the surrounding community, region, and states across the country. In the past 20 years, Camp Luther Ridge has already suffered significant loss with the widening of Airport Road and US 25. This has caused us to relocate the historic entrance gatehouse, and we can no longer use our Friendship Circle worship area. Luther Ridge serves Lutheran congregations across 7 states in the southeastern United States. 73 of those congregations have already submitted petitions or resolutions opposing the transmission line. We retained an environmental expert to conduct a Phase 1 environmental assessment for Camp Luther Ridge, which has now been completed. I have copies to leave with you tonight for your research and additional information. Camp Luther Ridge consists of 160 plus acres, housing one of the only green spaces in South Buncombe County, an area that has been vastly growing for the last 10 to 15 years. The campus naturally consists of a small spring-fed lake, hardwood and pine forested hillsides, many small springs, and green open meadows. Through our 60 plus years at this site, ministry and board leaders, site committee members, our legal teams, and our environmental councils have been strategic and intentional to place the buildings and the infrastructure in a way to protect occurring natural wetlands, forests, and animal habitats. The proposed route goes through the front entrance of the ministry. Everyone who enters the site would be impacted. The fear the tall towers and lines would create in the minds of those coming to camp would cut participation by close to 50%. The revenue loss would devastate the camp. We have recently begun keeping track of economic impact. It is believed to be in excess of $9 million. I implore you as fellow leaders and as North Carolina public staff to have Duke Energy abandon this route and to make a different decision on transmitting the needed power. Thank you for your time and consideration.
I have some short questions addressed to Duke. This has to do with visual impact of the towers. Will it, and you can answer these now or we can do it all at once. Is it going to be a double circuit?
Okay.
Okay, and how many wires are there, how many cables are there on a circuit?
Stop the clock.
We can still beat the clock. You can share with me.
There are 3 conductors per circuit, 3 wires.
Okay, and is there another cable that goes along with the circuit, a ground or whatever you...
There is a cable at the top of the structures that shields the cables below from lightning.
Okay, so my point is there are 7 cables hanging on there, and that has to do with the visual impact. Is ACSS the same as bundling, which wasn't mentioned?
The ACSS conductor allows us to run more power through the line without having to add additional conductors onto the structure.
What's bundling? That looks like a square cross-section 4-wire thing.
It's where you have more than one conductor close together for that particular phase of that 3-conductor or 3-phase circuit.
Are you doing any of that?
No, not on this part.
Okay. And why does the line have to be 140 foot high? Why can't it be low? Now, I think, based on physics and electricity, there's a reason for that. Or am I wrong?
There is a reason for, obviously we have to meet there's a code that we have to meet called the National Electrical Safety Code, and it specifies minimum ground clearances, and we have to meet those ground clearances between the lower conductor and the ground. So we have to be a certain height up with the conductor minimum, and then in order to not have structures real close together, which would further disrupt the land use, they need to be sometimes a little taller to be able to span through it.
So my point there is, still have time, is that the air is part of the circuit, and this thing is off the ground, not just so somebody doesn't bump into it, but it has to be there. And that's part of the consideration. And then, okay, that was it.
One final question, since we have technical difficulties.
500 square acres was referred to back when we were talking about solar. Could someone correct that? There is no such thing. It's just like a typo, but what was the area?
I'll share it too. No, yeah, there is no, it's 500 acres. Yeah, sorry, square acres. It's redundant, so it's 500 acres. But it's still, relatively speaking, it's, you know, you put this plant, it's going to take a 40 acre footprint for 10 times the power. And it's just a matter of, you know, we can't physically put that much solar in a mountainous region.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you.
And it doesn't produce at 7 in the morning when we peak, but it's a great resource. It just doesn't fit this region, and we use a lot of it.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. James Renishin, I hope I said that right. Catherine Bond, Gordon Smith, and William Burdett. You are on deck.
Yeah, it's James Renishin. I live in Saluda. Been there for 10 years. And I'm sorry, I know Duke has tried really hard, but I'm not buying it. I don't get why we need the new gas plant or even the transmission lines. I think Duke is suffering from a lack of imagination. And here's an example. I was looking at the integrated resource plan you released a couple of days ago. And for 2016, your renewables represent 3.8% of your base case capacity. And in 2030, they're going to represent 4%. And if, as a consumer and someone who cares about climate change, about the environment, I'm very disappointed. If I was a Duke shareholder, I'd be furious because there's no way that's a realistic scenario. It's hopelessly naive if you think that you can be a modern utility in the year 2030 and only producing 4% of your base case from renewables. That's just ridiculous. You're talking about of all the new capacity you add to your system, 90% coming from gas, another fossil fuel. I mean, even your own integrated resource plan admits that you're going to have some kind of carbon pricing coming in before then. Nobody knows what it is. And I appreciate Duke has been pushing for this for years to eliminate uncertainty in the industry. But I just can't reconcile the fact that we're going to have carbon pricing, we're going to have much more renewables, like the state of California, which this week is debating a bill to have a mandate of 50% renewables by the year 2030, and you only want 4. I'm sorry. So I think I need to see a much more sophisticated understanding of the economics, of the politics, and the ecology of energy production before I can buy any of the projections that you're making for our region.
Lady and gentlemen of the public staff, thank you. My name is Kate Bond, neighbors. I live in I live in a small community called Sunnyview. We heard a lot from Duke tonight about what this is going to cost them and how much something's going to cost and money. And my concern is who's going to really be paying for this modernization project? I live in Polk County. And like a lot of other people who live in Polk County, I don't get my power from Duke Energy. I get my power from a rural co-op. However, if one of Duke's proposed lines goes near my property, then I will be paid. I'll pay in lower property values, I'll pay in the destruction of our mountain views, I'll pay in the loss of tourism and recreation venues. Duke cannot possibly justify the loss of real property to the people of Polk, Henderson, and Greenville counties, and Spartanburg County. Especially those of us who are not even serviced by Duke Energy. Duke clearly has no consideration for the ultimate public cost of this project. This is not a modernization project. This is a devastation project. And I am outraged by this.
Thank you, Ms. Bond. Mr. Gordon Smith, Mr. William Burdett, you are up next.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking the North Carolina Utility Commission staff and Henderson County for hosting this. Special thanks to James and Jay up there who's listened and answered many hundreds of emails from us. I'd also like to thank Duke for being here tonight, and also thank Representative McGrady for answering his emails and his leadership and care for the Henderson County citizens during this Duke Foothills process. I've been a resident here since 1981 and raised 2 children with my family. And we live on Fortescue Road, just off Mount Olivet Road. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask Steve a question because I think it's real important. I have more of a prepared statement. But the question I want to ask, because it's very important to this group, has to do with underground lines. But it has to do with underground lines, the same lines that they're doing in New England, and they're running down from Vermont. And that's DC lines that they run. Right now I hear they're just 2 6-inch cables. They can be buried in road cuts, and they can run the whole 50 miles. I know you have to switch from AC to DC. The data we have on it shows it may be 2-3 times more expensive than overhead lines. That does not consider the cost of the land that you're going to have to purchase. It also doesn't consider the cost associated with the loss of value of property and tourism. could you comment on if Duke is going to be using that? Are you going to be using that and looking at that option, why that option doesn't fit? Because when you analyze everything you've been doing, this transmission line, if it went underground as DC, would totally change the whole project.
Yes, I've seen the documentation all those projects, bringing power down from Canada. Those were merchant transmission projects, independent investors to basically profit from the energy sold off of those transmission lines. We'll look at that. You know, obviously that's something that's technology, DC technology, something that's been around for a while. One thing I would caution you about the economics you're seeing. Those merchant lines are being designed for two cables, one positive and one negative, just like your car battery cables. And there's no backup. The utilities that use the resources coming from those lines will have to plan for backup when those lines are out. And there will be some infrastructure somewhere that will have to be in place in order to meet the planning criteria. So what we'll have to look at, we'll have to make sure there's some degree of contingency, redundancy in order for that application to work. So we believe it will be more than the cost difference that you're looking at.
Can I just have a
I'm sorry, I've got to go to Mr. Burdett.
All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
One thing I think is very important. If we need to have investment from a third party to invest in this line, we can do that. So it just can't be due.
Mr. Burdett. Thomas DeVoy and Patricia Hayes. You're up next.
Thank you. My name is Bill Burdett. Our property is in the Zirconia area, borders the Greenville watershed, and Route 7C is the targeted route in our area, which would cross our driveway 3 times. I'm not here to talk about that, though. I really want to talk about what I think is a huge credibility problem that Duke Power has. I think we've heard a lot about that. Already been mentioned. I think this problem casts a large cloud of doubt over the whole project, and it stems from past actions, information, data that many consider outdated, contradictory, or simply inadequate. 3 particular issues I want to touch on that illustrate this, and one of them was mentioned earlier, the coal ash disaster. We were led to believe that generating electricity from coal was a safe and somewhat clean process, and sadly we found that that is not the case with the coal ash disaster. Another issue that I'd like to bring up is the 2014 IRP report, which, if you don't know what that is a report that is required by the Utilities Commission of Duke Energy to report every year what they are going to plan to do for the year and on. The 2014 report in September made no mention of this plan at all. I think someone said that they alluded to the plan. I think it was more of an illusion. We found out about this in May of 2015. It seemed a little bit fishy to me that all of a sudden we've been hit with this plan. Another issue that has been touched on involves the land acquisition at Campobello. The land for the substation in Campobello was surveyed for purchase in September of 2014, the same month that Duke submitted the IRP with no mention of the substation. The land was purchased in March of 2015 from former Spartanburg County Councilman Frank Nutt. Why did Duke buy 200 acres in Campobello when the substation itself will only cover 17 acres? How was the valuation of almost $5 million reached, and why did Duke pay a premium of over $25,000 per acre when land in that area is generally valued at a fraction significantly lower? Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for being here. My name is Tom DeKay, and I live in Saluda, North Carolina. So am I supposed to be up? I think so. I live on a 45-acre farm along Route 88 that we built, and I built with my wife, and I'd like to address the litigation that the Attorney General of North Carolina in 2015 took on with the North Carolina Waste Awareness and Reduction Network. And it was against Duke Power and the North Carolina Public Utility Commission together on the 10% return on equity that was decided in the favor of Duke. And in that docket, it stated that in the 2013 Utility Commission inferences that Duke needed to be aware of these items and many more. But one item was that the rate increase approved in this case, which includes the approved return on equity and capital structure, will be difficult for some of Duke's customers to pay. And that Duke needs to provide safe and adequate and reliable electric service, and this is essential. And that's from the litigation docket transcripts. So my question is, how can this so-called modernization plan be called adequate when it isn't affecting us by inflicting economic hardship? The Asheville needs for power are 400 megawatts, and that's projected into the future. And this is without considering the future advances in technology, which are surely going to come along because we witness them daily. And then the transmission lines, they have the capability of transporting 800 megawatts. What is the purpose? With a 10.2% return on equity, this seems more like greed than need. It's already affecting the people that I work with. I'm a builder, and I have subs whose jobs have been lost. So they're trying to get work for me to come on, and real estate deals, house deal I had. And my question to Duke is, why are we getting a Mercedes when all we need is a pickup truck?
Can Duke respond to, was it Decay, Mr. Decay's question?
Yes, and again, we have reliability standards that do require that redundancy, and I know it seems when you talk about these numbers that this is excessive, but really keeping both from a transmission and a generation perspective, the amount of adequate generation to serve not just your peak need, but to have the required redundancies that are required by both state and federal regulators so that you can handle contingency events as part of our planning criteria. When you start walking through those redundancies, it seems like a Cadillac, but the benefit of that Cadillac is you get power, but for a big storm coming through or knocking down the wire, you get power 100% of the time. In a pickup truck, it might not run all the time, and electricity service is required 24/7 365, and we do our very best to serve it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. Patricia Hayes is, and then Bill Hay and April Pauley. Y'all are up next. Ms. Hayes.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity of letting us present to you. My name is Patricia Hayes, and I live in Mill Spring, North Carolina. I am here to express my opposition to the proposed 230 kilowatt transmission lines running from the Campobello substation to Asheville. And I am opposed because Duke Energy has not made a compelling case that they need such transmission lines in order to meet the peak energy demand in the foreseeable future in Asheville. Duke has mentioned the solar plan as part of its modernization plan. How is demand reduction from solar generation included in calculated estimated future demand, and in turn the necessary scale of the natural gas plant? Why does it appear that Duke Energy has not considered meeting a portion of growing demand with cheaper and cleaner technologies like energy efficiency demand, distributed generation like investments in rooftop solar? A 2007 study by York, Kushner, and White entitled Examining the Peak Demand Impacts of Energy Efficiency, a Review of Program Experience and Industry Practices, clearly illustrates that energy efficiency programs can yield measurable, significant peak demand savings, and reducing demand is the most cost-effective way to meet demand. However, Duke's targets for energy efficiency and demand response have remained flat for years at about 0.3% of demand. Utilities across the country are easily meeting 1 to 2% of demand with efficiency programs. A truly modern plan for the Western Carolinas would include, don't you think, investments in saving energy, not just doubling down on fossil fuel power generations. We should expedite the construction of the already planned solar array farm at the site of a gas-fired plant, and they should support, not lobby against, the Energy Freedom Act, North Carolina House Bill 245. If passed, this act would allow homeowners to obtain financing for solar and ensure full compensation of excess electricity sent back to the grid, which is known as grid metering. Lastly, I believe that Duke has failed to demonstrate the need for the power lines for the benefit of Western North Carolina. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bill Hay and April Pauley. Let me say one thing. This meeting was scheduled to go from 6 to 9. I have been told we have to have this room cleared by 10 o'clock. I'm willing to go another half hour if y'all are. Okay? All right, so let's keep going.
I know I don't look like Bill Hay, but I'm speaking for him, if that's all right. He's a veterinarian. He was called into emergency surgery. My name is Rebecca Kemp. I live in Columbus, North Carolina. Bill Hay is a senior veterinarian and owner of the Tryon Equine Hospital. And I appreciate this opportunity to register our opposition to Line 2C, which would directly impact the Tryon Equine Hospital. This hospital is a major asset to the community. As you know, Polk County depends largely on the equine industry. And this is a state-of-the-art facility, $1 million facility that was just completed within this last year. It supports a lot of the horses, not only in Polk County, but regionally. Other places to go would be Athens, Georgia, or Raleigh, North Carolina for this type of care. This transmission line would have direct impact on the state-of-the-art equipment such as the MRI and other diagnostic equipment there, just as it would in a human hospital. This equipment cannot be operated with the transmission line as close as it is planned to see. Horses are extremely valuable horses are coming through there. $1-million horses, believe it or not, are coming through that hospital in connection with the Tryon International Equestrian Center that I'm sure you've heard about. So we would like to register that our very strong opposition to this line. And I also have one question of the Duke Power people. Does anyone with Duke Power live directly under a transmission line?
As a matter of fact, I got the same letter from Union Power because my neighborhood has a high voltage line being proposed next to it. So I'm on both sides, and we already have a right of way, not too far from us, and now they're putting one near our neighborhood. So I understand that it has local impact. So yes, we are impacted as well.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. April Hawley. James Maxwell, Curtis Hayes. Ms. Pauley?
Yes, my name is April Pauley Mink, actually. And,
can you speak up to the...
My name is April Pauley Mink, and I appreciate you being here. And I do hope that you will represent the public's needs and address our issues. I am an outraged citizen of Polk County. I'm an outraged citizen of these beautiful foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains that these people even acknowledge. I'm an outraged citizen of North Carolina. I am outraged because Duke Energy is a convicted environmental criminal. They have been found guilty of egregious environmental acts for which they have been levied some of the largest fines ever under the Clean Water Act. They have polluted the French Rock, the Catawba, and of course, the Dan River. They send people whose wells, people who cannot drink their well water in the middle of our state, they send them a gallon a day of drinking water per resident. And yet, I am so outraged that they can be allowed to propose such an environmentally disastrous plan in one of the most beautiful places in this country. People come from all over this country to visit these beautiful mountains. They find solace here. These are special mountains, as even acknowledged by these Duke officials. So how can they be allowed to rapaciously destroy what is so beautiful here? And it's not just that it has environmental impact and beauty, but these same environmental factors are economic drivers here. And you cannot put a price on that. You cannot put a price on tourism and the beauty and the camps and our clean water and our rivers and what people enjoy here in the lifestyle. And so I would hope that I know that there is an extremely cozy relationship in the state of North Carolina between a McCory energy-friendly administration posing up to NC Diener and even, I'm sorry, your own board, and of course the NC Utilities Commission. So I am very discouraged, but I am hopeful that you are the least cozy of those organizations. And I would hope that you would truly represent our interests. We do not need this project. It has not been justified, and they cannot be allowed to raid another beautiful, beautiful part of this state. They have done enough of it.
Thank you, Mr. Pauley. Next up is James Maxwell, Curtis Hayes, and Jay Davies. James Maxwell. Okay, let's go on to Curtis Hayes. I'm sorry, Mr. Maxwell. Curtis.
I'm Curtis Hayes.
Okay. Well, is that James Maxwell? Okay. Well, go ahead. We'll get to you later.
Okay, that's going to be a hard act to follow. So we heard tonight that Duke was planning to build this 230 kV transmission line, regardless of whether or not they were going to build that that gas-fired plant in Asheville. I bet, other than the Duke employees, no one in this room had ever heard of that plan before. I certainly hadn't. I didn't see it in the 2014 IRP either. So I'd like to know what Duke's plans were to meet the growing energy needs of the Asheville area prior to discovering that natural gas would be available from PSNC Energy. According to an article in the Asheville Citizen-Times published in May of this year, in which Mr. Lloyd Yates of Duke was quoted, Duke had been considering adding 126 megawatts to meet the region's growing energy needs with diesel-powered fast-start peaking units to augment the 376 megawatt existing coal-fired plant, giving a total of 502 megawatts. Now, 502 megawatts were sufficient for future needs less than a year ago. Why are they now proposing to build a 650 megawatt gas-fired plant, which will produce an additional 148 megawatts beyond the 102 megawatts originally planned? What are they going to do with that excess capability? We heard tonight that maybe on a cool summer day or on a warm winter day, they'll be able to send a little bit of that power south to Campobello to go to the Eastern Carolinas. Well, if anybody in this room believes that scenario, I have some land for sale in South Florida I'd like to talk to them about. Thank you.
Mr. Maxwell, I see you over there now. If Jay Davies, William Artis, and Charles Jones, y'all could get ready. Mr. Maxwell, I'm sorry I didn't see you earlier.
I'm going to be extremely brief. As you can tell, I have a bad case of laryngitis. And I can't top what I've heard tonight in a technical sense about people talking about things like the buried lines. I guess, Mr. Sykes, I'd like to address you in particular. And I've spent a career working with major companies and the major executives in the company. Oh, please sit down. You don't need to stand up. I just learned that you have only had this job, 5 weeks? And I presume it's I presume it's a promotion for you. If it's not a promotion, I would hope that you're looking for a promotion in the future. Let me just suggest that what I've seen in major corporations, people like GE and so forth, that maybe you should think out of the box. There seems so much in the box tonight. I heard 2/3 of the time taken up you asking him questions which all sounded very, very rehearsed. So what I'm going to say to you is, you've got a bunch of people in this section of the country that I think are willing to work with you if you won't work with them. The idea of a little higher rates does not bother me. And I've heard too many easy excuses why we're not going to go to buried lines. I think you can do that, and you've got a population that's willing to work with you in that respect. So thank you.
Mr. Jay Davies. Mr. William Artis is up next. Diana, could you grab that up?
My name is Jay Davies. I live in Polk County, and I'm here wearing 2 hats. One is an individual landowner who is living on Route 6A, and one of the boundaries of what corridor Route 6A is 50 feet in my front yard, and the center line for the corridor Route 6A is about the length of this room behind the foundation of my house. So if that 150-foot right-of-way goes into effect, which will be clear-cut and sprayed, that boundary of that right-of-way will be about 100 feet from my foundation. I will never be able to sell this property. No one would buy a property with 150, 160, we don't know, foot tower, the distance from this room from your front picture window. Now, we've heard Duke Power say in their own words, and their engineers were very persuasive. They have an algorithm, a cost-benefit algorithm that factors in everything except how it impacts us as individuals. I look around the room, most of us have some gray hair. To me, that indicates we're at the end of our earning potential. We've built our portfolios. We have a significant amount of our net worth in our homes and property. Now, when it comes time to move into assisted care or nursing, that home will be liquidated, and that's my plan, so I don't become a pauper and I can pay my bills. But because the damage irreparably to my property values by this line, if 6A is chosen, I will be a pauper much sooner than I had planned if I lived that long. And many of you I know will be in the same place. And then who's paying the real cost? It's the person and the people of America who pay for Medicaid. What's the real cost of these lines? They don't know what it is because they don't factor it in. Now, I am here also in the second half to be a member of the Packwood Area Conservancy. It's a land trust in Polk County. And we protect, with private property landowners, their natural resources on their property. They want to create a legacy for the future. Packwood Area Land Conservancy, like all land conservancies, is recognized by the state government, the federal government, and local government. It is a binding contract between that landowner that we help enforce so those natural resources are protected and preserved in perpetuity. These routes that are proposed here will totally invalidate the values those people want for their land. You are the solution. Please help. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. William Artis, and then Charles Jones and Gary Crowder Creek, y'all are on deck. Mr. Artis.
My wife and I moved down up here from Charleston, South Carolina about 8 years ago. We bought a farm, Henderson County. It's on line 10B. Our farm is located right underneath Lookout, or Jump Off Rock, as people call it around here. And there's mountains on 3 sides of our farm. And there's a little dip in 2 of the mountains, and that is exactly where one of these towers is going. It's looking westward off of Jump Off Rock. So the view from Jump Off Rock, what you're going to see there from now on is a tower, because that's a pivot point, and it has to go there if it takes this route. Okay? The people that live behind me, the Garrisons, have been there for 3 or 4 generations. This line's going right next to their house. They're going to lose everything in there. They're going to have to stay there because their property, the house in itself, is not in the right-of-way. So they're going to end up being stuck there. It's not just me. This goes on all over the county. In addition to all of this, I've made a living over the last 30 years trading in the stock market, the commodity market, and the currency markets. I follow cycles, growth cycles, economic growth cycles, and I can tell you every cycle that I am looking at now and I am following now, there is no way on the earth you're going to see 2% growth for the next 10 to 20 years in this country. We are at peak. What we've had now in 2008, we had a big crash. What has happened since then in real estate is a dead cat bounce. Okay? We are going to roll over again. We are headed into another deflationary master cycle. If you don't believe this, all you have to do is look at the global commodity markets. All of the natural resource commodities have been drastically dropping in price over the last year. Over the last 6 months, it has escalated. This is going to continue. There are currency wars going on all over the world now. If they believe that people are going to go out and buy all this real estate and have all this growth over the next 20 to 30 years, they're living in a dreamland. They're doing this for no reason whatsoever. We're not going to have the growth there that they think they're going to have. But large corporations like Duke, politicians, always project growth. They have to. Large businesses and corporations, this is how they make a living. They grow. And they project growth. That way they have a positive attitude going on. They can tell voters that we're going to have all this growth, we're going to have all these jobs. The reality is it's not going to be there. We are in for a cycle where really what's coming is another depression, if it wants truth. That's what I'm looking at.
I'm sorry, Mr. Harms. Charles Jones is up next, and Carrie Crowder Creek and Travis Rocky can get ready.
I'm Charles Jones. I live in River Ridge development off of Deep Gap Road, and we're affected by Sector 21. I'm here tonight to ask the support of you guys that are representing us. You told me tonight that you're here to protect my interest. And I have to believe that's why you're here. That's the only hope I have, is you're going to protect my interest. And that you would look at any negative impact that will affect me. I'm not an economist. I don't have a lot of projections, and I've heard enough about lines and towers. I'm here to say that I have a log cabin on Hungry River. It's a trout stream in Section 21 in River Ridge Development. And I'm here to say that that's what I have invested in for my life, for my family, and for my grandchildren. Now, the property that I'm talking about, I have a deck on the side of my cabin, and if I sit on my deck and look out, all I will see now is transmission lines and 2 towers, because I'm at the river, which means there's going to be a tower up here and a tower up here to cross that river. Now, the effect on the economy, the effect on all these things, you know, we've heard enough about all that tonight. I'm saying how it's going to affect me. When it comes across my property, goes up the hill, crosses my property again, and then I own a lot behind my property that will split it right down the middle, which is 2 acres. My daughter can't build a house on that property because you can't build a house under a transmission line. And I'm here to say that that property will be of no value. It will not be able to sell it because it has a transmission line splitting the 2 acres. Now, in the original maps, that was a 1 acre tract and another 1.5 acre tract. When it was combined, it became 1 tract, and the way Duke Power saw it, it was 1 tract. They saw it in the old maps as 2 tracts. But when it split that, neither tract will be able to be buildable. The only building site that would have been on that tract, because, as Duke Power says, the land's like this and the land's like that. Well, the only building site on the land like that was directly under the power line. So I'm here to say that I oppose that, and that I wanted to move my family out there, and if it had to be, my retirement is my property. My retirement is my home. So I represent those people that have invested everything they have in their homes and their property and are here to speak, but did not get a ticket to speak tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Ms. Crowder Creek, and then Travis Rocky and Ralph Grant.
My name is Carrie Cheek. I live in Hoopers Creek on segment 17B. The proposed route would clear cut the ridge line of High Top Mountain behind my little family farm, but I'm not here to mourn the environmental impact, the cultural impact, the economic damages that would be done to my community. I'm here to ask how a $1.1 billion project proposed by a multi-billion-dollar company can have failed so magnificently at something so straightforward, mapping the routes. As you are aware, the maps you used to create these proposed routes through Henderson County were several years old when you started this process, and now they are 4 years old. At the Duke Energy Info session that I attended here in this room, which more accurately should have been termed a chaos session, your representatives, I think it might have even been Randy, told me that it was Henderson County's fault that the maps were old. It was the tax assessor's office. It was their fault. And I spoke to Stan Duncan in the tax assessor's office about this. He said, yes, the maps are updated every 4 years, and we're due for fresh new maps this December. So they were old, but you knew this, and yet you didn't find room in this enormous budget to have someone cross-check your old maps with new maps, like Google, or perhaps even to pay someone to drive around for a couple weeks to make sure that that field, that 4-year-old field, was still a field and not 60 homes. That's not a facetious example. That is real. Hyde Park neighborhood in Arden would have transmission lines within 20 feet of 60 homes. And there's probably a lot of other neighborhoods and homes in this same situation. If Duke Energy has failed on something so completely basic, why on earth should we trust that they've got anything else about this project right?
Mr. Markey, and it's Ralph Grant and Marno Rolfe.
Thanks, y'all. My wife and I live in Section 20 in Flat Rock, and I'm a simple man, okay? Duke Energy has stated that burying the power lines along the rights-of-way would be too expensive. That's what they said here tonight. That's what they keep saying. And if that's the case, why did Duke Energy spend $26 billion to buy Progress Energy in 2012 if they ain't got the money, okay? Why has Duke Energy spent $125 million in fines just this year? Just this year, where they paid the federal government and the state of North Carolina because they polluted rivers and lands. Why did Duke Energy give the Democratic National Convention $10 million, for which shareholders are now suing them? And now Duke has the gall to stand before us and say, Duke doesn't want to spend the money to save our environment and avoid all this tension with their customers by burying the power lines along the current rights-of-way. And why is that? And I hope y'all will ask that question.
Mr. Ralph Grant, and then Marno Rolfe.
Good evening. My name is Ralph Grant, and I'm speaking on behalf of the communities of Champion Hills and the pathways of Solomon Jones. Both communities are located west of downtown Hendersonville and will be affected by the proposed corridor 10B. I speak on behalf of 380 property owners and over 675 residents. I would also like to thank the North Carolina Utilities public staff for the opportunity to speak to them. Tonight I'd like to address several concerns. First, Champion Hills, along with other communities, understands that it will be inevitable that property values will be negatively impacted and property taxes significantly diminished by the proposed 10B corridor. We must protect the pristine environment and natural beauty that makes this area unique. Second, we would recommend that Duke Energy consider the use of existing transmission power right-of-ways, which will eliminate substantial costs not only to Duke Energy, but to the affected municipalities who will fight for its constituents' rights. In addition, proven transmission conductor technology called aluminum conductor composite reinforced, or ACCR, which you asked a question about, which was not answered correctly, will
can be used on existing right-of-ways and will have a direct impact and contain costs for Duke Energy and the eventual ratepayers, which is us. This overhead transmission conductor can double the capacity of an existing line without exceeding existing towers' mechanical or clearance limits. We know that there are existing transmission lines that support various right-of-ways in western North Carolina, and Duke Energy should do an assessment to see if existing towers and right-of-ways supports the use of ACCR. This conductor has half the thermal expansion, therefore has less sag at high energy levels. Less sag means lower tower heights. These attributes can result in 2 or more times the ampacity, while maintaining or improving clearances, tensions, and mechanical loads on structures. Bottom line, maximum amps with no compromise. In the past 12 years, over 2,000 miles of ACCR have been installed, and no failures have ever been recorded. We believe that Duke Energy should explore how other areas of energy companies have approached dealing with similar situations. We have assumed that this has been done and that Duke Energy is aware of projects that have the same scope of complexity.
Thank you. Mr. Ms. Marno Rolfe, I'm sorry.
Actually, I'm speaking for my mother, Margaret Rolfe, who's sitting over here in the audience. She lives on Howard Gap Road in Tryon, North Carolina. And thank you again for this evening's opportunity. I stand aligned with everyone who is working to make Duke Energy rethink the necessity and viability of Duke Power Foothills project. I want now to share environmental facts and published history that you and Duke Energy personnel need to be made aware of regarding the proposed Section 5 transmission line route. A portion of this route lies directly above Interstate 26 from Columbus, North Carolina to the top of the mountain at Howard Gap. And it was reassuring to hear something, but it's never over until the fat lady sings. Over 130 years ago, the Southern Railroad did not choose the mountain route for their line because they determined the soil was unstable. 70 years later, in 1968, the North Carolina Department of Transportation dismissed history and chose this route for Interstate 26. Their 7-mile section took over 7 years to complete instead of the expected 2. In 1969, the project was called the biggest goof in North Carolina road building history by the Western Carolina Tribune because millions of yards of soft, muddy earth slid off the mountain, covering and clogging properties and rivers below. Newspaper articles from the Asheville Citizen-Times, the Western Carolina Tribune, the Native Stone, the Thermal Belt News Journal, the Landrum Leader, and the Spartanburg Herald Journal covered this environmental catastrophe with front-page headlines. They reported that engineers had not done adequate core sampling. Interviews documented engineers stating that the mountain soil was type 6, or sugary soil composed of decomposed rock which eroded badly. More specifically, there were no large rock formations to be found, only small boulders, mica, rotten granite, clay, and fool's gold. Millions of dollars were spent from 1969 through 1975 hiring consultants to solve the problem. After extensive testing and geological surveys, the mountain was drilled to allow water to drain, and over 100,000 feet of piping covered with sand and gravel were placed above, under, and below I-26 to allow water to drain. Additionally, Miller Mountain and Warrior Mountain were bitched to prevent soil from sliding down the mountain. Duke Power's Section 5 lines will go directly across the bitch section of Miller Mountain. Their lines will disturb piping, sand, and gravel, as well as mature 40-year-old tree roots that secure the mountain in place. If the mountain's tree cover is disturbed by transmission tower footings and cleared lines, right-of-ways, the mountain soil will once again slide into the valley and river below with devastating environmental consequences. If Duke Energy places their Section 5 transmission line above I-26 and the mountain begins to move, just as decades-old newspaper accounts describe, I want to know who will be responsible, Duke Energy or the state of North Carolina. Does Duke really want to ignore the facts, data, experiences, and history I'm providing tonight and disturb these mountains? I sincerely hope not. Thank you.
All right, we have reached the end of our meeting. I appreciate your willingness to stay to to 9:30. We've got to have this room cleared by 10. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I want to thank you for your attentiveness, your respect. If you did not get a chance to speak tonight, I won't if everyone can listen, I want to give you a little information here. If you did not get a chance to speak, I want to encourage you to submit written comments in the Utilities Commission docket. The docket, you can visit that Utilities Commission's website at www.ncuc.net. And if you look on the right-hand side, there's a Duke Energy Western North Carolina transmission line link in the right-hand column. And there's information on that page on how you can follow this